Have you ever looked at a complete stranger and felt certain you knew their story, only to discover you were completely wrong? What if the person everyone dismissed as a gold digger wasn't chasing wealth at all, but was quietly sacrificing everything to keep one little boy alive and hopeful? And what if the man who once believed the worst about her became the one forced to confront the painful truth that the greatest betrayal wasn't hers? It was his own failure to see her. Tonight's story isn't about revenge. It isn't about a billionaire rescuing a struggling woman. It's about how memory can lie, how assumptions can destroy years of love, and how the quietest people often carry the heaviest burdens. So, before we begin, take a second to tell us in the comments. Have you ever been judged by someone who never took the time to know the real you? We'd love to read your story. And if you enjoy heartfelt American love stories filled with powerful life lessons, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to Love Stories by Mr. Johnson, and turn on notifications so you never miss another unforgettable journey. Now, let's begin. Most people never notice the woman pushing the cleaning cart. They notice the polished marble floors, the spotless glass walls, the fresh scent in the hallways before the executives arrive. But they rarely notice the person who makes those things possible. She moves quietly, almost invisibly, as though the building has learned to look through her instead of at her. Her uniform is simple. Her shoes are worn from thousands of miles walked across polished office floors. Her hands are rough, not because life has been cruel, but because honest work always leaves its mark. If you saw her after midnight, carefully wiping fingerprints from the glass overlooking Seattle's skyline, you might assume she had always lived this life. You might think she made bad choices. You might even wonder why someone her age was cleaning offices instead of sitting behind one of those polished executive desks. That's the danger of first impressions. Our minds love unfinished stories. When we don't know the truth, we quietly invent one. And once we believe it, we stop looking any deeper. The people in that building had done exactly that. To them, she was simply the night cleaner. A woman whose name most employees never bothered to learn. No one knew she rushed home every morning before sunrise because a little boy waited for her with sleepy eyes and a smile that somehow made every aching muscle worthwhile. No one knew she often skipped breakfast so there would be enough food left in the refrigerator for him after school. No one knew the folded piece of paper tucked safely inside her apron pocket wasn't a receipt or a shopping list. It was a spelling test with a perfect score. At the bottom, written in uneven handwriting, were the words that kept her going through every exhausting night. "Mom, thank you for working so hard for me." She had read those words so many times that the paper had begun to soften at the edges. To anyone else, she was just another cleaner. To one little boy, she was his whole world. And then, on a rainy Tuesday night, something happened that no amount of hard work could have prepared her for. A forgotten laptop charger, an unlocked executive office, a familiar voice she hadn't heard in 12 years. One quiet word, her name. Maya? She froze. Not because she was afraid, because some voices have the power to unlock memories you've spent years trying to pack away. Slowly she turned. Standing in the doorway was the man she had once imagined growing old with. The man whose family called her a gold digger. The man who believed them. The man who had gone on to become one of the youngest billionaire CEOs in America. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Because sometimes, the loudest conversations happen in silence. He remembered the woman he thought had chosen money over love. She remembered the man who had chosen doubt over trust. Neither of them realized that memory had been quietly rewriting their story for years. And, before this night was over, both of them would discover that the hardest truths to face are not the ones we forget. They're the ones we remember incorrectly. Their second chance wouldn't begin with romance. It would begin with one ordinary observation of a stranger they thought they already knew. Tuesday nights always smelled like lemon disinfectant and rain. By 11:30, the office towers in downtown Seattle had emptied of hurried conversations, ringing phones, and the polished confidence people carried during the day. The elevators moved less often. Computer monitors dimmed one by one. The city outside softened into a sea of reflected lights shimmering against rain-soaked streets. For Maya Brooks, this was when the building finally became honest. During the day, everyone seemed to be performing. Executives rehearsed confidence. Managers rehearsed authority. Clients rehearsed success. But after midnight, all that remained were forgotten coffee mugs, wrinkled jackets hanging over expensive chairs, and handwritten notes abandoned on conference tables. People left behind more truth than they realized. Maya pushed her cleaning cart down the 34th floor hallway, listening to its familiar squeak echo against the marble walls. She had reported the loose wheel 5 months earlier. Nobody had fixed it. Eventually, she'd stopped mentioning it. There was something strangely comforting about that squeak now. It reminded her that not everything broken needed immediate repair. Some things simply became part of the journey. She paused outside a conference room enclosed entirely in glass. Rain traced slow paths down the windows overlooking Elliott Bay, blurring the lights of passing ferries into soft ribbons of gold and white. Maya unfolded her blue microfiber cloth. Spray, wipe, fold, repeat. Every movement carried the rhythm of someone who no longer needed to think about the work itself. Instead, her mind wandered somewhere far more important. She reached into her apron pocket and carefully unfolded a piece of paper that had already been opened at least 20 times that day. It was Noah's spelling test. Across the top, written in bright red ink, his teacher had circled 100%. Underneath, in crooked handwriting that leaned slightly to the left, Noah had written, "Mom, I know you're tired. I clean my room so you can rest when you get home." A tiny smile touched Maya's lips. "You sweet boy," she whispered. She traced the edge of the paper with her thumb before folding it neatly again. Children weren't supposed to notice when their parents were exhausted. Yet somehow, Noah always did. He never complained that she missed bedtime because she worked nights. He never asked why other mothers attended school events while she slept through the afternoon after another 12-hour shift. Instead, he quietly found little ways to make life easier for her. Sometimes he'd wash the breakfast dishes without being asked. Sometimes he'd leave half his sandwich untouched because he knew she'd forgotten to pack lunch for herself. She hated that he noticed those things. Children deserved carefree memories, not memories of sacrifice. She slipped the note safely back into her pocket and continued toward the executive offices. The names printed on the frosted glass doors meant very little to her. Vice President, Chief Financial Officer, Legal Counsel, Chief Operations Officer. Every office looked almost identical once people went home. Leather chairs, awards, family photographs, expensive watches forgotten beside keyboards, half-finished bottles of sparkling water. Luxury didn't look very glamorous after midnight. Mostly, it looked messy. Maya smiled to herself. Life had a way of making everyone human, eventually. Half an hour later, she reached the final office on the floor, the CEO suite. It was always last. Not because anyone instructed her to save it, because it had the largest windows in the building. She liked ending her shift there. The skyline reminded her that tomorrow always arrived, whether today had been kind or not. She unlocked the office with a master key issued to the overnight facilities team. The room smelled faintly of cedarwood and fresh coffee. Someone had clearly worked late. A laptop sat open on the desk. Several financial reports lay scattered beside it. A navy suit jacket hung over the back of an Italian leather chair. Maya sighed softly. "Long day," she murmured to no one in particular. She placed her cart near the entrance and began restoring order. Coffee mug, wastebasket, pens aligned, desk wiped, books straightened. She picked up a framed photograph that had fallen face down beside the bookshelf. The wooden frame had cracked slightly in one corner. Carefully, she dusted the glass before setting it upright. The photograph showed a smiling young man standing between an older couple. Graduation robes, bright sunshine, proud parents. Something about the young man's smile tugged gently at the edge of her memory. Not recognition, just familiarity. Like hearing a song through another room. She frowned slightly before shaking her head. Funny how certain faces reminded you of someone without actually belonging to them. She returned to cleaning. Outside, thunder rolled quietly over Puget Sound. Across the city, a black sedan pulled into the underground garage. Ethan Walker checked the time on his watch. 12:18 a.m. He closed his eyes for a moment. Another 16-hour workday. The board meeting had gone well. Investors were happy. The company had secured another international acquisition. Financial news outlets would spend the morning calling him brilliant. If only they knew how tired brilliance felt. He reached for his briefcase before stopping abruptly. His laptop charger, still sitting on his office desk. He rubbed a hand across his face. "I really am getting old," he muttered. His driver offered to retrieve it. Ethan shook his head. "No, I'll grab it. I need the walk." The building security guard nodded as Ethan entered through the quiet lobby. The overnight cleaners offered polite smiles. He returned each one. His father had taught him something before he died. Never ignore the people who keep your life running. It was one lesson Ethan had never forgotten. He knew the reception staff by name, the maintenance supervisor, several security officers, even the gentleman who watered the indoor plants every Wednesday morning. Small kindnesses cost nothing. Yet, they often mattered most. The elevator climbed slowly toward the executive floor. Alone inside the mirrored cabin, Ethan loosened his tie. For the first time all day, there was silence. No meetings, no investors, no reporters. Just the quiet hum of machinery carrying him upward. He realized he couldn't remember the last time he'd gone home before midnight. Success had arrived exactly as everyone promised. So had loneliness. The doors slid open. The hallway lights had dimmed into their overnight setting. Everything was peaceful. until he heard the faint squeak of a cleaning cart somewhere ahead. He smiled absent-mindedly. Someone else was still working. He walked toward his office, already reaching into his pocket for his access card. The office door stood slightly open. He pushed it wider. "I'm sorry," he called gently. "I just forgot my—" The words stopped. A woman stood beside his desk, with her back turned toward him. She was adjusting the frame of an old graduation photograph. Then, almost absent-mindedly, she tucked a loose curl behind her ear. A tiny movement. Ordinary. Forgettable. Except, his heart lurched so suddenly, it almost hurt. He knew that gesture. He had watched it hundreds of times while waiting outside classrooms, while walking beside the waterfront, while listening to her laugh over coffee. Memory arrived before reason did. No, it couldn't be. The woman slowly turned around. Time did something strange. It didn't stop. It simply folded. The years between them seemed to disappear and remain all at once. She looked older, not old, just shaped by life in ways memory had never imagined. Her eyes were the same. Warm, steady, tired. For several long seconds, neither one spoke. Then Ethan heard his own voice, before he realized he'd spoken. "Maya?" She stared at him. Recognition flickered across her face. Not surprise, recognition. As though she had always known that one day the past would eventually find them both. Very softly, she answered. "Hello, Ethan." And suddenly, 12 years of carefully buried memories stood quietly between them, waiting for someone to speak first. For a moment, the only sound in the office was the soft hum of the air conditioning. Neither Ethan nor Maya moved. It was remarkable how 12 years could vanish in a single heartbeat and yet remain painfully present at the same time. Ethan had imagined this moment more times than he cared to admit. Sometimes he imagined seeing her in an airport, rushing toward another gate while he stood frozen with regret. Sometimes he imagined passing her on a crowded Seattle sidewalk, both of them pretending not to notice. Once, during a sleepless night, he'd convinced himself he saw her sitting in a cafe across the street from his office. He'd crossed 3 lanes of traffic without thinking, only to discover it was someone else. Memory had a cruel sense of humor. It gave you certainty where there was none. Now she was standing less than 10 feet away. Real, breathing, holding the same blue cleaning cloth she'd been using moments earlier. Nothing about the reunion resembled the dramatic scenes people imagined when old lovers met again. There were no tears, no angry accusations, no music swelling in the background. Just 2 people trying to reconcile who they remembered with, who stood before them. Maya was the first to look away. "I'll only be another few minutes," she said quietly, returning her attention to the desk. "You don't have to wait." Professional, polite, as though they had once been colleagues instead of 2 people who had once planned a future together. Ethan didn't move. "I wasn't waiting." She glanced at him. "I forgot my charger." A small smile crossed her face. "You always forgot your charger." The words slipped out before she could stop them. For the first time, they both smiled. It lasted barely 2 seconds, but it was enough to remind them that somewhere beneath the years and the misunderstandings, familiarity still existed. "You remember that?" Ethan asked. She gave a soft shrug. "You used to leave it everywhere. The library, my apartment, the coffee shop on Pike Street. You bought 3 extras because you kept losing the first one." He laughed under his breath. "I forgot about that." "No." She folded the cloth carefully. "You remembered. You just needed someone else to remind you." Her words lingered in the room longer than either of them expected. Because they weren't talking about laptop chargers anymore. Ethan found himself studying her face, not in the way strangers stare, in the way someone searches for pieces of a person they once knew. There were faint lines at the corners of her eyes now, not from age, from smiling through difficult years. Her hair was tied back beneath a navy headscarf that matched the facility's uniform. The silver necklace she used to wear every day was gone. Instead, she wore a simple chain with a tiny heart-shaped pendant. Practical shoes replaced the colorful sneakers she'd once insisted made rainy days less depressing. Life had changed her. So had responsibility. Then he noticed her hands. Years ago, she had dreamed of becoming a nurse. He remembered those hands practicing bandages on him while laughing whenever she wrapped them too tightly. Now they were dry. The skin across her knuckles had roughened from years of cleaning chemicals and constant work. Something tightened painfully in his chest. She caught him looking. "They're just hands, Ethan." He looked up, embarrassed. "I'm sorry." "You don't have to apologize. They've earned every mark." There wasn't a trace of self-pity in her voice, only quiet acceptance. That unsettled him more than if she'd sounded bitter. Maya picked up the empty coffee mug from his desk. "Still drinking coffee after 10? He smiled. "You told me I'd regret it when I got older." "And?" You were right. I usually am. That earned a genuine laugh from both of them. For a brief moment, it felt strangely easy, almost normal. Then, silence returned. Not awkward, heavy, like an unopened letter. Finally, Ethan asked the question that had been sitting on his heart ever since he recognized her. How have you been? Maya looked at the coffee mug in her hands. Most people asked that question expecting a one-word answer. Good, busy, fine. But after 12 years, how do you fit an entire lifetime into one sentence? She could tell him about the nights she'd cried after Noah fell asleep because the rent was due again. She could tell him about studying nursing textbooks during lunch breaks until she realized she could no longer afford tuition. She could tell him about losing her mother, about learning to repair broken washing machines through internet videos because hiring someone cost too much, about birthdays celebrated with homemade cupcakes instead of bakery cakes, about the pride she'd felt when Noah won the school science fair using recycled cardboard because buying supplies wasn't an option. Instead, she simply smiled. I've had good days. And difficult ones. But we're okay. We? She realized what she'd said. Yes. A softness entered her expression that Ethan hadn't seen all evening. My son and I. The words landed gently, yet they echoed loudly inside Ethan's mind. My son, he nodded. How old is he? 9. A pause. His name is Noah. Something in the way she spoke the boy's name made Ethan understand immediately. No matter how exhausting life became, Noah was the brightest part of it. He must keep you busy. He keeps me honest. She smiled. When children are watching, they notice everything. They don't always remember what you buy them, but they remember how you make them feel. Ethan found himself absorbing every word. That sounded exactly like the Maya he used to know. The woman who believed people mattered more than possessions. The woman his family had once insisted only cared about money. The contradiction unsettled him. His eyes drifted toward the folded paper sticking out slightly from her apron pocket. She noticed. My son's spelling test. Oh? He got 100%. The pride in her voice transformed her face. She carefully unfolded the paper and handed it to him. Ethan smiled as he read Noah's message. Mum, I know you're tired. I cleaned my room so you can rest when you get home. He stared at the uneven handwriting for several seconds. He's thoughtful. He learned from watching. She took the paper back carefully. I try not to let him see when I'm struggling. But children have a way of seeing the things we hide. Ethan nodded slowly. My father used to say something similar. What was that? Kids don't become what you tell them. They become what they watch. Maya smiled. He sounds like a wise man. He was. The smile faded from Ethan's face. I miss him. I'm sorry. I heard. She stopped herself. I heard he passed away. 3 years ago. He would have liked to see you. She frowned slightly. Me? He always did. He respected you. Those words caught her off guard. His father had always been kind to her. Not because she was dating Ethan. Because kindness came naturally to him. For years, she'd wondered whether he ever knew how everything ended. She had hoped he hadn't. A notification buzzed on Ethan's phone. He ignored it. Then another. Then a third. The board of directors could wait. This conversation couldn't. Maya. She looked up. I've thought about you. The honesty surprised even him. She didn't answer immediately. Finally, she said quietly, I know. You know? She nodded. Sometimes. When someone was once important to you, and you don't need them to tell you. You just know they remember too. He swallowed hard. I searched for you. She looked genuinely surprised. You did? For months. You'd moved. Your phone was disconnected. No one knew where you'd gone. I thought. He stopped. What? I thought maybe you wanted me to disappear from your life. Maya lowered her eyes. There are moments, she said softly, when leaving feels easier than explaining. He wanted to ask why. He wanted to ask what had happened after she walked away all those years ago. He wanted answers to questions that had followed him into every relationship he'd failed to build since then. But something in her expression told him this wasn't the moment. Trust wasn't rebuilt with interrogation. It began with patience. She checked the time on the small watch fastened to her wrist. Oh no. What is it? I have to finish. If I'm late catching the bus, I won't make it home before Noah wakes up. You work every night? 6 nights a week. And during the day? I sleep. She smiled lightly. At least, I try to. Ethan looked around the spotless office. She had already finished. Without another word, he walked to the cleaning cart and gently returned the spray bottle she'd left on the conference table. "You missed one." She blinked. "What?" "The bottle." A tiny laugh escaped her. "I guess I did. Looks like we're both still forgetting things." She looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. "Maybe." She pushed the cart toward the door. When she reached it, she stopped. Without turning around, she spoke. "Good night, Ethan." "Good night, Maya." She disappeared into the quiet hallway, the familiar squeak of the cleaning cart growing softer with every step until it faded completely. Ethan remained standing in the middle of his office. The laptop charger sat exactly where he'd left it. Yet he couldn't remember why he'd come back for it. His eyes wandered to the window Maya had cleaned only minutes earlier. The glass was spotless. For the first time in years, he could see his own reflection with perfect clarity. And what he saw wasn't a billionaire CEO. It was a man wondering whether the greatest mistake of his life had begun with something as simple and as dangerous as believing someone else's version of the woman he loved. Before we continue, let me ask you something. Have you ever believed what other people said about someone, only to discover later that the truth was completely different? Or maybe you've been the person who was judged without anyone taking the time to hear your side. Share your experience in the comments. Your story might encourage someone else who needs to know they're not alone. And if this story is touching your heart so far, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to Love Stories by Mr. Johnson, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss another unforgettable love story filled with real-life lessons and second chances. Now, let's see what really happened all those years ago, and why the woman everyone called a gold digger walked away without ever defending herself. The next evening, Ethan Walker did something he hadn't done in nearly 7 years. He left his office before midnight. Not because there wasn't work waiting. There always was. His inbox still held more than 100 unread emails. Investors expected a revised proposal by morning. A video conference with the company's Singapore office had already been pushed back twice. None of it felt as urgent as the question that had followed him home the night before. What had really happened to Maya? He stood in his penthouse kitchen, staring at a mug of coffee that had long since gone cold. Seattle's skyline stretched beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows, glittering beneath another blanket of rain. Most people imagined a billionaire's home as a place of constant celebration, luxury, freedom, happiness. The truth was quieter. The silence inside the apartment felt almost rehearsed. No toys left on the floor. No television humming in another room. No one asking how his day had been. Everything was exactly where it belonged. Yet, nothing felt lived in. He remembered something Maya used to say whenever they studied together at the community college library. A house can be clean and still feel empty. Back then, he'd laughed and told her she was being dramatic. Now, standing alone in a home larger than the apartment they once dreamed of renting together, he understood exactly what she'd meant. His phone buzzed. His younger sister, Claire. He hesitated before answering. "Hey," she said cheerfully. "You're actually awake." "I usually am." "You sound tired." "I am. You working again?" "Not exactly." There was a pause. "You saw her, didn't you?" Ethan's grip tightened around the mug. "How did you know?" "I can always tell when you're thinking about Maya." He let out a quiet laugh. "After 12 years?" "Especially after 12 years." Claire had been the only member of the Walker family who had never openly criticized Maya. She had been 19 when Ethan and Maya dated, still young enough to question the adults around her. "I ran into her at the office." "She works there?" "She's part of the overnight cleaning crew." Claire fell silent. When she finally spoke, her voice carried genuine sadness. "I wish Mom could see that." Ethan frowned. "What do you mean?" Claire chose her words carefully. "I mean, maybe she'd realize she was wrong." His chest tightened. "Our family wasn't wrong." Claire didn't answer immediately. Instead, she asked a question. "Ethan, can you remember one single time Maya actually asked you for money?" The question caught him completely off guard. He opened his mouth, closed it again. His mind searched through memories he'd replayed for years. Birthday dinners, walks along the waterfront, movie nights, study sessions, conversations about the future. He remembered his mother's warnings, his brother's frustration, his aunt's certainty. "She's using you. Girls like her know exactly what they're doing. Once you inherit the company, she'll own half of everything." He remembered hearing those words countless times, but Claire hadn't asked about them. She'd asked something else. Could he remember Maya herself asking for money? He searched harder. Nothing came. He stopped. "I don't know." Claire's voice softened. "I've been asking myself that question for years." Before Ethan could respond, she quietly ended the call. He remained standing in the kitchen long after the screen went dark. For the first time, doubt entered a memory he had considered settled. Across the city, Maya unlocked the front door to the small two-bedroom apartment she and Noah had called home for almost 6 years. It wasn't much. The wallpaper had begun peeling near the kitchen ceiling. The heating made strange noises every winter. The bathroom sink leaked whenever someone turned the tap too far. But it was theirs. More importantly, it was safe. "Mom!" Noah came running from the living room wearing mismatched socks and a superhero t-shirt that had clearly survived one wash too many. He threw his arms around her waist before she'd even closed the door. "Easy," Maya laughed. "I still have my backpack." "I know. I missed you." "I missed you too." He stepped back and looked at her carefully. "You look tired." She smiled. "I always look tired." "No." He shook his head. "You look different." Children noticed changes adults overlooked. "What makes you say that?" "You've smiled 3 times already." She blinked. "Have the first?" 4 now." He grinned proudly. "I counted." Maya laughed despite herself. "You're impossible." "I get that from you." "That's what Grandma used to say." The mention of her mother warmed her heart. No matter how much time passed, Noah still found little ways to keep her memory alive. "What did you do after school?" "I finished my science project." "You want to see it?" "Of course." He disappeared into his bedroom before returning with a carefully built model of the solar system made almost entirely from recycled materials. Painted paper balls, cardboard rings, fishing line. It wasn't perfect. It was beautiful. "This is incredible." "You really think so?" "I know so." He beamed. "My teacher said buying expensive supplies doesn't make a better project." She said, "Imagination matters more." Maya nodded. "Your teacher sounds very wise." She wasn't just talking about school projects. Later that evening, after dinner, Noah sat at the kitchen table finishing his homework. Maya washed the dishes while listening to him quietly sound out vocabulary words. Simple moments like these had become her favorite part of every day. Not birthdays, not holidays, just ordinary evenings. She'd learned something life rarely taught young people. Extraordinary moments were wonderful, but ordinary ones were where love lived. "Mom?" "Yes?" "Can I ask you something?" "Always." He hesitated. "Were you ever in love before Dad?" The plate slipped slightly in her hands. She caught it before it hit the sink. Children often ask difficult questions without realizing it. She dried her hands and joined him at the table. "Why do you ask?" "We're learning about families. Some kids have stepdads. Some have grandparents. Some have one parent." Mrs. Harrison said every family has a story. Maya smiled. "She's right." "So, were you?" She looked toward the rain-speckled kitchen window. For a long moment, she said nothing. Finally, "Yes. I was." "Were you happy?" The answer arrived before she could stop it. "Very." "And then?" She took a slow breath. "Sometimes." Two good people can still hurt each other. Noah considered that. Did he stop loving you? She thought about Ethan standing in his office the previous night. The look in his eyes. The questions he hadn't asked. The regret he couldn't hide. "I don't know," she answered honestly. "I think." "He stopped believing me." Noah frowned. "Those are different things." She looked at him. "What do you mean?" "If you love someone." He shrugged. "Shouldn't you believe them too?" The innocence of the question stole her breath. Children had a remarkable way of uncovering truths adults spent years avoiding. She reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes." "Big ones?" "The biggest." That night, as Maya boarded the late bus to work, she couldn't stop replaying her conversation with Noah. "If you love someone, shouldn't you believe them too?" She rested her forehead against the cool window. Outside, Seattle blurred into streaks of color beneath the rain. The city had changed over the years. New buildings, new cafes, new people. Yet one memory remained untouched. A sunny Saturday afternoon 12 years earlier. She had been sitting across from Ethan in a tiny coffee shop near the university campus. He'd been laughing because she'd insisted on splitting the bill. "You don't have to do that," he'd told her. "I invited you." She'd smiled while sliding a few folded bills across the table. "My mother raised me to pay my share." "You'll hurt my pride." "I'll survive." He'd laughed. "You really are stubborn." "No." She'd grinned. "I just never want anyone thinking I owe them something." Back then, it had seemed like an ordinary conversation. Now, remembering it hurt. Because somewhere along the way, People had convinced Ethan that the woman who insisted on paying for her own coffee had only wanted his money. As the bus rolled toward downtown Seattle, Maya closed her eyes. Some memories faded with time, others became sharper, especially the ones that never stopped asking, what if? The following evening, Ethan found himself watching the clock more than his computer screen. It was a habit he hadn't developed since his 20s, back when he used to count the hours until Maya finished her evening classes. Back then, anticipation had felt hopeful. Now, it felt uncertain. At precisely 11:42 p.m., he looked out through the glass wall of his office. The 34th floor was almost empty. Only the security desk at the end of the hallway remained occupied. A few minutes later, he heard it. The soft, familiar squeak of a cleaning cart. He looked up, instinctively. Maya wasn't looking for him. She moved from office to office with quiet efficiency, checking each room against a printed checklist clipped to her cart. She greeted the overnight security guard with a warm smile. "Good evening, Mr. Alvarez." The older man smiled back. "Evening, Maya. How's your granddaughter?" Her face brightened. "She won her spelling bee yesterday. I knew she would. You've been practicing with her for weeks." Mr. Alvarez chuckled. "She says you're her lucky charm." "I'll take that as a compliment." As Maya continued down the hallway, Ethan noticed something that surprised him. She seemed to know everyone, not just their names, their lives. The janitor replacing ceiling lights, the maintenance technician repairing a vending machine, the young receptionist working overtime downstairs. She stopped for a brief conversation with each of them. Never long enough to delay her work, just long enough to make them feel seen. It reminded Ethan of something his father had once told him. Success isn't measured by how many important people know your name. It's measured by how many ordinary people smile when they see you coming. His father had lived by that principle. Somewhere along the way, Ethan wondered if he still did. He stepped out of his office. "Maya," she turned, visibly surprised. "I didn't realize you were still here. I finished earlier than usual." That wasn't entirely true. He'd postponed 2 meetings simply because he knew she would eventually reach this floor. She leaned lightly against the cleaning cart. "You don't have to explain." He smiled. "I wasn't aware I was explaining." "You were," she laughed softly. "You always explained things when you felt uncomfortable." He rubbed the back of his neck. "I still do that. A little." He sighed. "I guess some habits survive. The good ones usually do." For a moment, they simply stood there, listening to the rain tapping gently against the windows. Then Ethan asked, "Can I help you?" She raised an eyebrow. "Help me? You're cleaning an entire executive floor by yourself." "I have 2 hands." "So do I." She couldn't help smiling. "I don't think the CEO is supposed to empty rubbish bins." "Who made that rule?" "The entire corporate world." He looked around dramatically. "I don't see anyone from the corporate world watching." She laughed again. A genuine laugh this time. It startled both of them. She hadn't laughed that freely in longer than she could remember. "Fine," she said. "If you're serious." She handed him a stack of fresh rubbish liners. "You can replace the bins while I dust." He accepted them without hesitation. For the next 20 minutes, they worked side by side. Not as billionaire and cleaner. Not as former lovers. Simply as 2 people completing an ordinary task. It felt strangely peaceful. "You know," Maya said, as she wiped down a conference table, "you were never very good at folding rubbish bags." Ethan looked at the untidy liner he'd just installed. "I wasn't aware there was a technique." "There is." She walked over and gently adjusted the edges. "There. It won't slide down now." He watched her hands. "You always fixed things." She shook her head. "Not always." "No?" "No. There were some things I couldn't fix." The sentence lingered between them. Neither needed to ask what she meant. When they finished the floor, Ethan pointed toward the small employee break room. "Coffee?" She glanced at the clock. "I probably shouldn't." "My treat." She smiled knowingly. "I'll pay for my own." He laughed. "Some things really don't change." "No, they shouldn't." 5 minutes later, they sat opposite each other at a small table that overlooked the rain-soaked streets below. The vending machine coffee wasn't particularly good. Neither of them seemed to care. "You remember this?" Ethan asked. She looked confused. "What?" "You always said coffee tastes better when you're talking to someone you like." She smiled into her cup. "I also said expensive coffee isn't automatically better coffee." "You did. And you argued with me. I was wrong." She looked up. "I know." They both laughed. It felt easy, until Ethan quietly asked, "Can I ask you something?" She nodded. "When we were together, were you ever unhappy?" She looked out the window before answering. Sometimes. He lowered his eyes. I knew it. But not because of you. He looked back at her. You made me happy, Ethan. You really did. Then, what was it? She wrapped both hands around the warm paper cup. Have you ever walked into a room and felt like everyone had already decided who you were before you spoke? His heart sank. He knew exactly where this conversation was going. My family. She nodded once. I kept thinking, if I worked harder, if I smiled more, if I proved myself, they'd eventually see me. They never did. Ethan swallowed. I'm sorry. She offered a sad smile. You weren't the one saying those things. No. But I wasn't stopping them either. Neither spoke for several moments. Finally, Maya broke the silence. Do you know what hurt the most? He shook his head. It wasn't that they thought I wanted money. It was that. She paused, choosing her words carefully. I started wondering if there was something about me that made people believe it. His eyes widened. Maya. When enough people repeat the same lie, you eventually start checking yourself to see if maybe they're right. Ethan felt a heaviness settle over him. He remembered family dinners where his mother had lowered her voice whenever Maya's name came up. She's very charming. Girls like that know exactly what they're doing. Poor girls don't date rich boys by accident. At the time, he'd argued. At first. Then he'd listened. Then he'd stopped defending Maya. He told himself it wasn't worth fighting about. Now he realized something painful. Silence had sounded like agreement. Back at the Walker family estate, 12 years earlier. The memory returned with startling clarity. His mother stood in the kitchen arranging flowers. Ethan. Has Maya ever talked about your future? Of course. We both have. I mean financially. He frowned. What do you mean? Has she asked about the company? No. The inheritance? No. The trust? He laughed. Mom? She doesn't even like talking about money. His mother sighed. That's exactly what worries me. He stared at her. I don't understand. Smart girls never ask directly. They wait. They're patient. They let the man volunteer everything. At the time, Ethan had rolled his eyes. He dismissed the conversation, or at least, he thought he had. Now, sitting across from Maya 12 years later, he realized something unsettling. His mother's words hadn't disappeared. They had quietly settled inside him, like seeds planted beneath the surface, invisible, until doubt gave them room to grow. Maya stood. I should get back to work. He nodded. I've already kept you too long. As they walked toward the hallway together, Ethan noticed a young intern struggling to carry 2 heavy archive boxes. Before he could react, Maya was already helping. Here, I've got one. You'll hurt your back. The young woman smiled gratefully. Thank you. No problem. Watching Maya disappear down the hallway with one of the boxes balanced effortlessly in her arms, Ethan felt something shift inside him. Not because she'd helped someone, because she'd done it instinctively, without looking around to see who was watching, without expecting recognition, without announcing her kindness. It was simply who she was. And suddenly, a question echoed through his mind, louder than ever before. If this was the woman she had always been, how had he ever believed she was capable of loving his bank account more than his heart? He stood motionless as another memory surfaced. Not of Maya. Of himself, standing in his parents' living room all those years ago. Listening, questioning, doubting. Not because Maya had changed, but because the people he loved had convinced him she never was who he thought she was. For the first time in 12 years, Ethan wasn't questioning Maya's character. He was questioning his own judgment. There are moments in life that don't feel important while they're happening. A missed phone call. A delayed reply. A conversation cut short because someone says, we'll talk about it later. Years pass before you realize that later never came. For Ethan Walker, the beginning of the end had started with something so ordinary he almost forgot it had happened. A Sunday lunch. One table. One family. One sentence that should have been challenged. Instead, he had remained silent. Present day. Ethan arrived at work unusually early. Not because he had a meeting. Because he'd barely slept. The previous night's conversation with Maya refused to leave him alone. He sat in his office, staring at the skyline without seeing it. His assistant, Lauren, knocked gently before entering. Morning, Ethan. Morning. She placed several folders on his desk. The acquisition contracts need your signature. He nodded. They can wait. Lauren looked surprised. In 12 years, I've never heard you say that. He smiled faintly. I suppose there's a first time for everything. She hesitated. Can I ask you something? You've worked for me long enough. You don't need permission. She leaned against the doorway. The cleaning lady. Maya? His heartbeat quickened. What about her? You looked at her yesterday. The way people look at old photographs. He gave a quiet laugh. Was it that obvious? I've worked with you for 7 years. I've never seen you forget a board meeting. You forgot one yesterday. He hadn't even realized. Lauren smiled politely. I hope whatever you're looking for, you find it. After she left, Ethan remained motionless, looking for something. That was exactly how it felt. Not looking for Maya, looking for the truth. Across town, Maya walked Noah to school beneath a shared umbrella. Rain drummed softly against the fabric overhead. Seattle had always known how to rain without making a fuss. Noah adjusted the backpack hanging loosely over one shoulder. Mom? Can I ask another grown-up question? She laughed. You ask those a lot. I've been practicing. I noticed. He looked down at the pavement. Do people ever stop missing someone? She glanced sideways at him. That's a big question for 8 o'clock in the morning. I know. My teacher says the best questions usually are. She smiled. Your teacher is very wise. So? She considered it carefully. I don't think we stop missing people. I think we learn to carry the missing differently. He frowned. I don't get it. When you first carry a heavy backpack, your shoulders hurt. But after a while, you become stronger. The backpack doesn't get lighter. You just learn how to carry it. Noah nodded slowly. So, too, you still carry yours? She smiled sadly. Every day. He reached over and quietly took her hand. Children often offered comfort without realizing it. Sometimes, that made it even more powerful. The memory arrived unexpectedly. 12 years earlier, Walker Estate, Sunday afternoon. The dining room overlooked Lake Washington. Sunlight spilled through tall windows onto polished oak floors. The Walker family had always treated Sunday lunch like a business meeting disguised as a meal. Everything appeared relaxed. Nothing truly was. Maya remembered smoothing her blue summer dress before entering. She had spent nearly an hour deciding what to wear. Not because she wanted to impress anyone, because she desperately wanted to belong. Claire greeted her warmly. I'm so glad you're here. So am I. Claire squeezed her hand. Don't let them intimidate you. They're actually nice. Eventually, Maya smiled. I'll survive. At the far end of the dining room, Ethan's father, Richard Walker, stood pouring iced tea. His smile reached his eyes. Maya, it's wonderful to see you. You too, Mr. Walker. For the 100th time. It's Richard. She laughed. I'll try. You've been trying for 2 years. I know. I keep failing. That's all right. I like people who keep trying. Richard had always treated her with quiet respect. Never flashy, never performative, simply kind. It was one of the reasons she'd fallen so deeply in love with Ethan. She had believed kindness ran in the family. She was only half right. Lunch began pleasantly enough. Claire talked about university. Richard discussed a charity project. Ethan joked about accidentally setting off the fire alarm while attempting homemade lasagna. Everyone laughed. Even Ethan's mother smiled. For a little while, Maya allowed herself to relax. Then dessert arrived. And so did the questions. Ethan tells us you're still working weekends. His mother smiled pleasantly. Yes. The hospital cafe. That must be exhausting. It helps pay tuition. How admirable. The compliment sounded genuine, yet something beneath it felt sharp. His older brother, Daniel, joined in. What are your plans after graduation? I'd like to become a pediatric nurse. A noble profession. His aunt sipped her wine, but not exactly lucrative. Richard frowned slightly. Evelyn. What? I'm only making conversation. She turned back toward Maya. Have you ever considered private health care? They earn much more. Maya smiled politely. I've always wanted to work with children. They're worth more than money. An uncomfortable silence followed. Daniel exchanged a glance with their mother. It lasted only a second, but Maya noticed. Not because they were obvious, because she'd begun watching for those looks months earlier. Looks people exchanged when they believed you weren't paying attention. Later that afternoon, while Ethan helped his father move outdoor furniture before the rain arrived, Maya wandered into the garden. The roses were beautiful. She bent slightly to smell one. Behind her, voices drifted through the open kitchen window. She hadn't meant to listen. Then she heard her own name. "She's very convincing." His mother's voice. "I'm telling you, Daniel. I've seen girls like her before." Daniel answered quietly. "Ethan won't listen." "He will, eventually. They always reveal themselves." Maya stood, perfectly still. Her heartbeat became louder than the rain beginning to fall. His aunt spoke next. "She's patient. I'll give her that. But no girl from her background dates into this family without expecting something." Someone laughed softly, not cruelly, confidently, as though discussing obvious facts. Maya stepped backwards before they noticed her outside. She walked quickly toward the lake, not running, just leaving. She sat alone on the wooden dock for nearly 20 minutes, watching rain scatter across the water, trying to convince herself she'd misunderstood, trying to believe there had been another Maya, another conversation, another explanation. When Ethan finally found her, she quickly wiped her eyes. "There you are." He sat beside her. "I've been looking everywhere." She forced a smile. "I just needed some air." He studied her face. "You've been crying." She shook her head. "It's just the rain." He looked at the cloudy sky. "It stopped raining 15 minutes ago." She laughed weakly. "I guess I'm late." He reached for her hand. "Did something happen?" This was the moment. The moment everything could still have changed. She could have told him. She could have repeated every word she'd overheard. She could have asked him whether he believed his family. Instead, she looked at Richard Walker laughing with Claire across the garden. She remembered the kindness he'd always shown her, the way he defended everyone before judging anyone. She didn't want another family argument. She didn't want Ethan caught between the people he loved. So she smiled. "No, I'm okay." It was the first lie she'd ever told him. And somehow, it became the foundation for every misunderstanding that followed. Present day. Ethan leaned back in his office chair, rubbing his temples. He couldn't stop remembering that Sunday. He remembered finding Maya sitting by the lake. He remembered believing her when she said everything was fine. Back then, he'd thought trust meant accepting someone's answer. Now he understood something different. Sometimes love required asking the question twice. Sometimes, "I'm okay," wasn't the truth. It was a plea for someone to notice that everything was falling apart. He closed his eyes. For the first time, he wondered, how many chances had he missed to save the relationship simply because he accepted the easiest answer? Some heartbreaks begin with one terrible argument. Others begin with 100 small moments that seem harmless until they're remembered all at once. For Ethan and Maya, love didn't disappear overnight. Trust did. And once trust began to crack, every silence sounded suspicious. Every misunderstanding found somewhere to grow. 3 weeks after that Sunday lunch, Ethan arrived at Maya's apartment carrying a paper bag from their favorite bakery. She opened the door wearing oversized sweatpants. Her nursing textbooks spread across the tiny dining table behind her. "You brought cinnamon rolls. You said studying is easier with sugar." She laughed. "I also said that's terrible health advice." I ignored that part. She stepped aside. "Come in." The apartment smelled like vanilla candles and fresh laundry. It wasn't much. A second-hand sofa. A scratched coffee table someone had left beside the road. Books stacked neatly against one wall because there wasn't room for another bookshelf. Yet Ethan had always loved being there. Nothing matched. Everything felt alive. Unlike the immaculate rooms he had grown up in, this apartment carried evidence of everyday life. A half-finished grocery list on the refrigerator. A tiny basil plant on the windowsill. Family photographs taped to the wall instead of framed because frames cost money. Maya noticed him looking around. "What? I forgot how much I like this place." She smiled. "I thought rich people preferred marble floors." "I prefer homes." She looked at him for a long moment. "You always knew the right thing to say." "I meant it." "I know." She believed him. At least, she still did then. They spent the afternoon studying together, or pretending to. Every 20 minutes, Ethan found another excuse to interrupt. "You're reading too much." "I have exams." "You've been reading for an hour." "I've been reading because someone keeps talking." "I can't help it." She laughed. "Yes, you can." "No. I've tried." By early evening, textbooks lay forgotten. Rain tapped gently against the windows, while soft jazz played through an old speaker Ethan had bought her for her birthday. Maya rested her head against the back of the sofa. "You know what I want someday?" He looked up from his coffee. "What?" "A front porch." He blinked. "That's your dream?" She nodded. "Not a mansion. Not expensive furniture. Just a little front porch." "Why?" "So when I come home from work, I can sit outside with whoever I love. We'll drink iced tea, watch children ride bicycles, wave at neighbors, and complain about how fast everyone's growing up. Ethan smiled. You've planned this. For years. He reached across the sofa and intertwined his fingers with hers. Then that's what we'll have. She looked at him. You promise? I promise. Neither of them realized that promises made in love are easy. Keeping them through doubt is much harder. The change happened so gradually that neither recognized it at first. It began with little questions that didn't sound dangerous. One evening, Ethan glanced at his phone during dinner. My mother invited us to the charity gala next month. Maya hesitated. I don't think I should go. Why not? I don't think your family wants me there. They're just, he searched for the right word. Protective. She lowered her fork. Protective of you? Or protective of your money? He sighed. Maya. I'm asking because those aren't the same thing. They just need more time. She nodded politely, but inside, something quietly broke, because she realized he hadn't denied it. A week later, another conversation lingered longer than it should have. Ethan had just finished a meeting with his financial advisor when Maya called. Hey. Hi. You sound distracted. I'm sorry. Long day. No problem. I was actually calling to tell you I got another shift at the hospital cafe. That's great. It'll help with tuition. There was a brief silence. Then Ethan spoke almost absent-mindedly. You don't really have to work that hard. What do you mean? I could help. She froze. Help? I mean, until you graduate. It wouldn't be a big deal. Her heart sank. She knew exactly where the thought had come from. Not from him. From conversations happening somewhere else. She answered carefully. No. You've helped enough. I wasn't offering because you asked. I know, but I still can't. Why? Because someday. I never want anyone saying I stayed with you because I needed your money. He rubbed his forehead. Maya. Nobody's saying that. She closed her eyes. Nobody's saying that. How could he believe that? She had heard them herself. Yet she couldn't bring herself to repeat those ugly conversations. I just... She whispered. I need to finish this on my own. He nodded. If that's what you want. It is. Neither realized they had walked away from the same conversation with completely different memories. Maya remembered refusing money because she wanted dignity. Ethan remembered offering help that she rejected. Memory had already begun editing the story. Present day. As the days passed, Ethan found more excuses to remain at the office after everyone else left. Not to interrupt Maya, simply to observe. She never cut corners. She greeted everyone by name. She thanked the security guards every morning before leaving. One Thursday, he noticed something unusual. Instead of taking the lift downstairs after finishing her floor, Maya carried a small paper bag into the staff break room. Curious, Ethan stayed where he was. A few moments later, two younger cleaners entered. One looked barely 20. The other couldn't have been much older. Maya opened the bag. Homemade muffins. I made too many. The younger woman laughed. You always say that. Because I always do. You know that's not true. Maya shrugged. Maybe. Eat before your next building. The young man smiled gratefully. I skipped dinner. I figured. How? You've been rubbing your stomach for 20 minutes. Everyone laughed. Ethan watched from the doorway without announcing himself. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She didn't know he was there. She simply noticed when people needed kindness. It was the same woman he'd fallen in love with. The same woman his family insisted had only cared about wealth. The contradiction became harder to ignore. That evening, Ethan drove somewhere he hadn't visited in years. The Walker family estate. His mother answered the door with surprise. Ethan, this is unexpected. I was nearby. She embraced him warmly. It's good to see you. The house hadn't changed. Fresh flowers stood in the entrance hall. Family portraits lined the staircase. Everything looked exactly as it always had. His mother poured tea into delicate china cups. You've been working too hard. I've been thinking. Oh? He hesitated, then asked quietly. Do you remember Maya? Her smile faded. I remember. I saw her. She set her teacup down. Where? She works in one of our office buildings. As a cleaner. For just a fraction of a second. He caught something he hadn't expected. Not satisfaction, not guilt, relief. It vanished almost immediately. What a shame, she said softly. It seems life didn't turn out the way she planned. The words landed heavily. Ethan looked at his mother. Then he remembered Noah's spelling test. The homemade muffins. The way Maya spoke about honest work without embarrassment. Nothing about her suggested a woman whose plans had revolved around wealth. He leaned forward. Mom, can I ask you something? Of course. When Maya and I were together, what exactly made you believe she was after my money? His mother's fingers tightened around her teacup. Mother's intuition. He waited. She offered nothing else. No conversation? No evidence? No request she made? His mother looked away. I was protecting my son. He searched her face. For certainty. For facts. For something solid. Instead, he found only conviction. And for the first time in his life, Ethan realized something that unsettled him more than anything else. A person could be absolutely sincere and still be completely wrong. He left the estate an hour later with more questions than answers. As rain streaked across his windshield, one memory kept repeating itself. Not something Maya had said, something his mother hadn't. She had never once explained what Maya had actually done, only what she believed Maya intended. Intentions weren't facts, assumptions weren't evidence, and somewhere between assumption and certainty, he had lost the woman he loved. As he drove through the quiet streets of Seattle, one thought refused to leave him. If he had asked Maya one more question, if he had trusted her one more time, would the last 12 years have unfolded differently? Some people measure success by promotions, others by bank accounts, by the size of a house, the make of a car, the number of people working beneath them. Maya Brooks measured success differently. Every morning, just before sunrise, she quietly opened the door to apartment 3B and listened. If she heard soft breathing coming from Noah's bedroom, she smiled. It meant she had made it home before he woke up. To her, that was success. It was 5:47 a.m. when Maya slipped off her shoes beside the front door. The apartment was still. She closed the door carefully, knowing exactly which part of the old frame creaked. She had learned every sound this apartment made. The loose floorboard near the hallway, the stubborn kitchen cabinet that refused to close properly, the radiator that knocked 3 times before finally warming the room. People often joked that old apartments had personalities. Maya thought they had memories. She hung her jacket by the door before quietly peeking into Noah's room. He was asleep, one arm wrapped around the stuffed elephant she'd bought from a thrift store when he was 4. The toy had once been bright blue. Years of love had faded it into a soft grey. She smiled. He had outgrown cartoons. He had outgrown bedtime stories. But somehow, he hadn't outgrown that elephant. Carefully, she pulled the blanket back over his shoulder. Without opening his eyes, Noah mumbled, "Morning, Mom." She laughed softly. "I thought you were asleep." "I was. You tucked me in. I felt it. You always do." His eyes remained closed. "So, did you eat?" The question made her chest tighten. Children weren't supposed to worry about their parents eating. "Yes." "You promise?" "I promise." Only half true. She had eaten. Half a sandwich around 2 o'clock that morning. It was enough. For now. "Okay. I love you. I love you more." He smiled in his sleep. "You always say that." "Because it's true." She gently closed the bedroom door behind her, then leaned quietly against the hallway wall. Some mornings, love felt heavier than exhaustion. After 4 hours of sleep, Maya was awake again. The smell of pancakes drifted through the apartment. Or at least, what Noah insisted were pancakes. The first one was slightly burned. The second looked more like a map than breakfast. The third finally resembled something edible. He proudly placed 2 misshapen pancakes onto a plate. "I made breakfast." "I can see that. You don't sound impressed." "I'm trying not to cry." He frowned. "Because they're bad?" "No. Because someone so little keeps trying to take care of someone so big." He climbed onto the chair opposite her. "You take care of me." "It's only fair." She reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "You know, but you don't have to grow up so fast." "I'm not. I'm just helping." There was no sadness in his voice, only certainty. Children often accepted responsibility without realizing how unusual it was. She silently promised herself again. One day, he wouldn't have to. That afternoon, Maya volunteered for an extra cleaning shift at a small community center before reporting to Walker Technologies later that evening. The community center wasn't part of her regular schedule. The director, Mrs. Henderson, simply called whenever someone was sick. "Maya!" The older woman smiled warmly as she entered. "I wasn't expecting you until 3. I finished early. Mrs. Henderson looked around the spotless entrance hall. You always do. I like finishing what I start. I've noticed. The older woman handed her a small envelope. Maya frowned. What's this? A thank you. You stayed late after the children's reading program last week. You didn't charge overtime. It wasn't necessary. Mrs. Henderson smiled. Neither is this. Inside the envelope was a grocery gift card. Maya immediately tried handing it back. I can't accept this. Yes, you can. I was only doing my job. No. Mrs. Henderson shook her head gently. You stayed because little Emma spilled paint all over the activity room. You stayed because she started crying, afraid she'd get into trouble. You told her accidents don't define good people. You spent 40 minutes helping her clean every brush. You weren't being paid anymore. You were simply being kind. Maya lowered her eyes. I couldn't leave her upset. I know. Mrs. Henderson folded Maya's fingers gently back around the envelope. Sometimes, accepting kindness teaches other people that kindness matters. Maya smiled. It had been a long time since anyone had insisted on helping her. That evening, Ethan stood near the reception desk watching employees leave for the day. He wasn't waiting for investors. He wasn't waiting for executives. He wasn't even sure he was waiting for Maya. He simply found himself paying attention to things he had overlooked for years. His building, his employees, the people whose names rarely appeared in annual reports. As he stood there, the receptionist smiled. Mr. Walker, everything all right? Perfectly. She laughed. You've been standing there 10 minutes. I have? I thought maybe you were waiting for someone. Before he could answer, the cleaning staff entered through the side entrance. Maya greeted each co-worker warmly. One woman looked upset. Maya noticed immediately. You okay, Denise? Denise sighed. My son's got a fever. I'm worried. Without hesitation, Maya reached into her lunch bag. Take my soup. Denise shook her head. No, you need it. My son already ate. I'm fine. Denise reluctantly accepted it. Thank you. Ethan watched quietly. He couldn't remember the last time he'd seen generosity that effortless. Not organized charity, not a public donation, just soup. One person noticing another. Perhaps kindness was never meant to be complicated. Later that night, Ethan walked into his office carrying 2 takeaway coffees. Maya was cleaning the bookshelves. She looked up. You've started making this a habit. So have you. I've worked here 4 years. I mean, talking to me. She smiled. Fair enough? He handed her one of the cups. She looked at the label. You remembered. Cinnamon. 1 sugar. No whipped cream. You always said whipped cream hides the taste. She laughed. I still believe that. I figured. They stood together near the enormous windows overlooking downtown Seattle. The city sparkled beneath the rain. You know, Ethan said quietly. I used to think this view was the best part of my office. And now? He glanced sideways at her. I'm not so sure. She smiled, but said nothing. Some compliments didn't require replies. After several minutes of comfortable silence, Ethan asked, Do you ever get lonely? The question caught her off guard. She thought carefully before answering. Sometimes. But loneliness isn't always about being alone. He nodded slowly. I know. She looked at him. You do? I spend most evenings in a penthouse with 3 empty bedrooms. She didn't pity him. Instead, she simply asked, Do you ever invite anyone over? No. Why? I kept telling myself I was too busy. Were you? He thought about it. Not always. She looked out over the city again. My grandmother used to say, People make room for what matters. He smiled faintly. She sounds wise. She never finished high school. Neither did my grandfather. But they taught me almost everything important. He found himself wondering how many lessons he'd overlooked because they hadn't come wrapped in expensive suits or impressive job titles. As Maya prepared to leave at the end of her shift, her phone vibrated. She smiled immediately. Noah? Her voice softened in a way Ethan had never heard before. I'm almost home. No, sweetheart. You don't have to wait up. Another pause. I know. I love you too. She ended the call. Ethan couldn't help smiling. He waits for you every morning? She nodded. He says he sleeps better after hearing my voice. The elevator doors opened. She stepped inside. Before the doors closed completely, she looked back at Ethan. Good night. Good night, Maya. The doors slid shut. Ethan remained standing in the quiet hallway. He suddenly realized something. In all the conversations they'd shared over the past week, Maya had spoken about Noah dozens of times, about his school, his homework, his dreams. his jokes, his kindness. But she had never once mentioned Noah's father. Not once. Ethan wasn't curious because of jealousy. He was curious because of the silence. Sometimes, what people never said revealed more than everything they did. And for the first time, he began to wonder what part of Maya's story was still hidden behind the smile she wore so effortlessly. Saturday mornings looked nothing like weekdays in the Brooks apartment. There was no rushing to catch the school bus. No hurried breakfast before Maya crawled into bed after another overnight shift. Saturday belonged to Noah. Even if Maya had worked until dawn, she tried to stay awake for at least a few hours before sleeping. She had made that promise to herself the day he was born. No matter how tired you become, never let him feel like he's come second to your job. Some promises cost more than money. This was one of them. Mom! Noah burst into the kitchen wearing an old football jersey 2 sizes too big. Guess what? She smiled over the frying pan. What? Our library is having family reading day. That's wonderful. They're giving away free books. Can we go? Maya pretended to think about it. I suppose I could make room in my busy schedule. He narrowed his eyes dramatically. What busy schedule? You nap, she gasped. I do much more than nap. You also drink coffee. She laughed so hard, she nearly dropped the spatula. You've become very brave. I learned from the best. He wrapped his arms around her waist. I love Saturdays. She kissed the top of his head. So do I. Because Saturdays reminded her why every difficult night was worth surviving. The Seattle Public Library buzzed with families. Children sat cross-legged on colorful rugs while volunteers read stories aloud. Parents browsed bookshelves with steaming cups of coffee. Laughter drifted through every corner. Maya watched Noah disappear into the children's section, already searching for books about space exploration. He had loved the stars ever since his third-grade teacher explained that every atom in the human body had once belonged to a star. He had come home that afternoon with wide eyes and declared, "Mom, we're made of stardust." She had smiled and replied, "Then shine like one." That conversation still lived inside her. She hoped it always would. While Noah searched for books, Maya wandered toward the parenting section. She wasn't looking for anything in particular. Sometimes reading about other people's experiences reminded her she wasn't the only parent trying to get everything right while feeling she got half of it wrong. A familiar voice interrupted her thoughts. Maya? She turned. Mrs. Harrison, Noah's teacher, a woman in her early 50s, whose kindness had restored Maya's faith in educators. Mrs. Harrison, it's nice to see you. And you. The teacher smiled warmly. Noah's over there convincing another child that Saturn is the greatest planet. Maya laughed. That sounds like him. Mrs. Harrison's expression softened. I hope you don't mind me saying this. Go ahead. He's one of the kindest children I've ever taught. Pride filled Maya's chest. Thank you. He notices when classmates are left out. He shares without being asked. He encourages children who struggle. She paused. Children usually learn those habits somewhere. Maya looked toward Noah. He was helping a younger boy reach a book from a high shelf. No one had asked him to. He simply noticed. Tears threatened to gather in her eyes. I worry all the time. Mrs. Harrison smiled. That's what good parents do. You wonder if you're doing enough. The truth is, children rarely remember whether life was perfect. They remember whether they felt loved. Maya swallowed hard. I hope he feels that. I don't hope. Mrs. Harrison answered gently. I know. At the same time, across the city, Ethan sat in the conference room during a quarterly strategy meeting. Charts covered the enormous screen. Revenue, growth, international expansion. Someone was explaining projected earnings for the next financial year. Ethan heard almost none of it. His attention drifted toward the rain sliding down the windows. Mr. Walker? He blinked. I'm sorry. The chief financial officer cleared his throat. We were asking about the Vancouver acquisition. Oh. Ethan looked at the presentation. I trust your recommendation. The executives exchanged surprised glances. Normally, Ethan questioned every figure, every projection, every detail. Today, his thoughts were elsewhere. After the meeting ended, Lauren caught up with him outside. You've been distracted all week. I know. You usually notice everything. You missed 3 mistakes in that presentation. He sighed. I've had something on my mind. Does it have a name? He smiled. Maybe. Lauren folded her arms. Can I give you some advice? You always do. When you keep replaying the past, make sure you're remembering events, not assumptions. He stopped walking. What made you say that? My grandfather had Alzheimer's. Before the illness, He always told me something. She smiled sadly. Memory isn't a recording. It's a storyteller. Every time you remember something, your mind rewrites it a little. Those words followed Ethan all afternoon. Memory isn't a recording. It's a storyteller. Had his own memories rewritten themselves over the years? That evening, Ethan drove to a quiet neighborhood on the north side of Seattle. Not because he intended to speak to Maya. He didn't even know exactly where she lived. He simply found himself taking roads he hadn't driven in years. Eventually, he parked beside a small public park overlooking Green Lake. Children chased each other across the grass. Parents sat on benches. Teenagers played basketball. Life unfolded in wonderfully ordinary ways. As he watched, a familiar laugh caught his attention. Across the playground, Maya stood beside Noah near the swings. She hadn't noticed him. Neither had Noah. Ethan remained where he was. He had no desire to interrupt. Instead, he observed. Noah ran toward the monkey bars with determined confidence. Halfway across, he slipped. Not far enough to get hurt. Far enough to become embarrassed. Before Maya could reach him, Noah climbed back up. "You okay?" she called. "I'm fine." "You sure?" "Yeah." She smiled proudly. "What do we do when we fall?" Noah dusted off his trousers. "We learn where to place our hands better next time. And we don't let one mistake decide what happens next." "Exactly." He climbed back onto the bars. This time, he made it all the way across. Ethan smiled. It sounded less like a lesson about playground equipment, and more like a philosophy for life. As the sun began to set, Noah spotted an elderly man struggling to gather groceries that had spilled across the pavement. Without hesitation, the boy hurried over. "I'll help." The man smiled gratefully. "Thank you, young man." Maya joined them, collecting apples rolling toward the curb. Within moments, everything was back inside the shopping bags. "You've got a good son," the elderly man said. Maya looked at Noah. "I know." Walking back toward the playground, Noah asked, "Mom?" "Yes?" "Why didn't anyone else stop?" She glanced back at the busy footpath. People had certainly noticed. Most had continued walking. "I don't know. Maybe they were in a hurry. I hope they weren't too busy to be kind." She placed a hand on his shoulder. "Never assume someone else will help. If you can do something good, do it. You may be the answer to someone's difficult day." Ethan watched the exchange from a distance. He remembered something else. Years ago, when they were dating, Maya had once crossed a busy street simply to help an elderly woman whose shopping bag had torn open. He had teased her afterward. "You can't save everybody." She had smiled and replied, "Maybe not. But I can help the person standing in front of me." She hadn't changed, not one bit. As Maya and Noah prepared to leave the park, Noah suddenly stopped walking. "Mom? What is it?" "I think someone's watching us." Maya turned slowly. Across the street, she spotted Ethan standing beside his car. For a brief second, their eyes met. He didn't hide. He didn't wave. He simply offered a small, respectful nod, the kind that asked permission without using words. Maya looked at Noah. "That's someone I used to know." "From work?" She hesitated. "From a long time ago." Noah looked curiously toward Ethan. He looked sad. Children often recognized emotions adults worked hard to hide. Maya looked back across the road. Ethan wasn't staring anymore. He had already turned toward his car, giving them the privacy they deserved. She watched him drive away until his taillights disappeared into the evening traffic. For reasons she couldn't quite explain, her heart felt heavier. Not because she regretted seeing him, because she had begun to realize something. The man who once walked away from her wasn't the same man quietly standing across the street. Life had changed him. Regret had softened him. Whether that would matter in the future, she didn't know. But as she took Noah's hand and started the walk home, another thought settled quietly in her heart. Sometimes people don't return to your life because they're looking for another chance. Sometimes they return because they're finally ready to understand the story they never took the time to hear the first time. There is a dangerous comfort in certainty. Once we convince ourselves that we know someone's intentions, we stop asking questions. We stop listening. Eventually, we stop seeing the person altogether. All we see is the story we've built around them. For 12 years, Ethan Walker had believed he remembered exactly how his relationship with Maya ended. Now, he wasn't sure he remembered it at all. Monday morning began like every other. His calendar was packed. A breakfast meeting with investors, a conference call with London, a product launch review, 3 interviews with potential executives. Normally, Ethan thrived on structure. Today, structure felt like noise. As he walked through the lobby, he noticed the large digital screen displaying one of Walker Technologies' core values. Integrity begins with truth. He slowed his pace. Truth. It was a word his company proudly advertised. Yet he wondered how often he had truly lived by it. Could a man build an entire business on integrity while allowing doubt to shape the most important relationship of his life? The question stayed with him all morning. Around noon, Claire called again. I hope I'm not interrupting. You never do. You've been thinking. I have. I can hear it. He smiled faintly. I spoke to Mom. Claire sighed. I figured. She still believes Maya wanted money. I know. Do you? There was silence. Finally, Claire answered honestly. I used to. Ethan frowned. You used to? I was young. When everyone around you repeats the same thing. It's hard not to believe it. She paused. But then I started remembering little things. Like what? Claire laughed softly. Remember your graduation? Ethan searched his memory. Vaguely. Maya gave you a fountain pen. She'd been saving for months. You tried to buy her an expensive necklace 2 weeks later. I remember. She made you return it. A faint smile crossed Ethan's face. She said it was too much. Claire nodded. She told me. If Ethan starts solving every problem with money, he'll never learn that showing up matters more than spending. Ethan closed his eyes. He remembered that conversation now. Not clearly. Just enough. You know something else? Claire continued. Maya never let you pay when she could afford to contribute. Even when it was only $5. I remember teasing her. I asked why she always insisted. Ethan's voice grew quiet. What did she say? Claire answered without hesitation. She said, I want Ethan to know I'm building a life beside him. Not asking him to build one for me. The words hit Ethan with surprising force, because suddenly, another memory surfaced, 12 years earlier. A Saturday afternoon, the neighborhood grocery store. Ethan had reached for his wallet after they finished shopping. Maya gently stopped him. I've got it. He laughed. You bought groceries last week. My turn. I make more than you. She smiled. You also eat more than I do. He laughed. Fair point. She paid, not because she had plenty, because keeping things balanced mattered to her. Back then, he'd thought very little of it. Now, that memory carried entirely different weight. That evening, Ethan drove somewhere he hadn't visited since graduating college. The small community college campus where he and Maya had first met. The buildings looked newer. The benches had been replaced. A student center had been added. Time had continued its work. He wandered slowly across the grounds until he reached the old courtyard. There it was, the weathered oak tree. 12 years ago. He had been sitting beneath it, frustrated after failing an economics quiz. A young woman carrying 3 heavy textbooks had accidentally dropped a folder beside him. Papers scattered everywhere. Without thinking, Ethan helped gather them. One sheet caught his attention. It wasn't class notes. It was a handwritten schedule. Monday, hospital cafe. 5 a.m., 11 a.m. Tuesday, classes. Wednesday, library. Thursday, hospital cafe. Friday, volunteer shift. Saturday, study. Sunday, visit Mom. He'd looked up. When do you sleep? She'd laughed. When I'm 80. He still remembered that laugh, the first one he'd ever heard from her. Present day, Ethan sat on the same bench. Students hurried past carrying backpacks and coffee. Nobody recognized him. For once, he appreciated that. An elderly groundskeeper slowly swept leaves from the path nearby. After a few minutes, the man wandered over. You look like someone searching for something. Ethan smiled politely. Is it that obvious? I've worked here 30 years. I can usually tell. Ethan looked around the courtyard. I met someone here once. The groundskeeper nodded knowingly. Happens all the time. Did you lose her? Ethan thought carefully before answering. No. I think I lost my understanding of her. The old man rested both hands on the top of his broom. They're not always the same thing. After a long silence, Ethan asked, Can I ask you something? Go ahead. If someone keeps hearing the same story over and over, can they eventually believe it, even if it isn't true? The old man smiled gently. My wife taught history. She always said, the most dangerous lies aren't the loud ones. They're the ones repeated until nobody remembers asking for proof. Ethan stared quietly at the fallen leaves. Proof. That word again. He had accepted opinions. He had mistaken certainty for evidence. But had he ever actually looked for proof? Later that night, Maya arrived at Walker Technologies just before 11. She wasn't expecting Ethan. After all, he had an international conference scheduled. She assumed he'd be home. Instead, she found him standing beside the reception desk, holding a cardboard archive box. "You moving offices?" she asked with a smile. He chuckled. "No, I've been cleaning." She blinked. "Voluntarily?" "I'm trying something new." She laughed. "I never thought I'd see the CEO dusting shelves. I'm discovering how much dust people create." "You'd be amazed." "I already am." He smiled. "I was actually looking for something." "What?" "My old personnel file." She looked puzzled. "Why?" "I found a box of documents from the early years of the company. There were employment records." "Letters." "Old paperwork. I thought there might be something worth keeping." "Did you find it?" He nodded slowly. "And something else." "What?" He looked at her. He carefully removed an old photograph from the folder. It had faded slightly around the edges. Maya gasped softly. She hadn't seen it in over a decade. It was the annual volunteer appreciation dinner at the children's hospital. Both of them were 23. She stood wearing blue volunteer scrubs. He stood beside her in an oversized apron after helping serve dinner. Neither of them looked at the camera. They were laughing at each other instead. "I forgot this existed," Maya whispered. "So did I." She gently held the photograph. "I remember this night. I burned macaroni. You burned 3 trays. You insisted the smoke alarm was overreacting." She laughed. "You looked terrified." "I was." She smiled down at the picture. "You stayed 3 extra hours helping clean the kitchen. You weren't even volunteering. You only came because I asked." He looked at the photograph again, then quietly said, "I'd forgotten that." She looked up. "No. You remembered. You just needed something to remind you." Once again, her words carried more meaning than they appeared to. Ethan realized that many of his happiest memories hadn't disappeared. They had simply been buried beneath years of pain and assumptions. And for the first time since seeing Maya again, he felt something unexpected. Hope. Not hope that everything would magically return to the way it was, but hope that the truth, patiently uncovered, might finally be stronger than the story he'd been told. Memory has a peculiar habit. It protects us from pain just enough that we can keep living. But sometimes, it protects us so well that it hides the very truth we need to heal. For Ethan Walker, every answer he uncovered seemed to create 2 new questions. The more he remembered about Maya, the less he recognized the man he had been 12 years earlier. The following afternoon, Ethan cancelled his lunch meeting. Instead of dining at the private executive club across the street, he drove to a small diner tucked between an old bookstore and a laundromat. The sign outside still read, "Margaret's Family Diner." He hadn't stepped inside since college. The bell above the door chimed softly. The smell of bacon, fresh coffee, and homemade pie wrapped around him like an old memory. Some places didn't change because they didn't need to. "Well, I'll be." A familiar voice made him turn. Margaret herself stood behind the counter, her silver hair tied into the same neat bun she'd worn for decades. She stared at him for a second before breaking into a broad smile. "Ethan Walker." He laughed. "You remember me?" "Honey." "I remember every student who couldn't afford breakfast, but always tipped anyway." He smiled. "You still call everyone honey. And I still make the best apple pie in Seattle." "I wasn't about to argue with you then. You'd lose." She pointed toward a booth near the window. "Sit. I'll bring your usual." "I don't even remember my usual." "You don't have to." "I do." A few minutes later, she placed scrambled eggs, toast, and black coffee in front of him. He smiled. "You really remembered." "I remember people. Orders are easy." After a few moments, Margaret studied him carefully. "You didn't come here for breakfast." "No. You came looking for yesterday." He looked surprised. "Is it really that obvious?" She chuckled. "Old people become good at recognizing regret." He looked down at his coffee. "I'm trying to remember someone." "The pretty nursing student?" His eyes widened. "Maya?" Margaret nodded. "Sweetest young woman ever walked through my door." "You remember her too?" She laughed. "Honey, that girl used to arrive every Thursday morning after working the hospital cafe. She'd order 1 bowl of oatmeal and ask for an extra spoon." Ethan frowned. "Why?" "Because she'd split it." "With who?" "With an elderly gentleman who lived behind the church. He never had enough money. So she'd pretend she couldn't finish breakfast." Ethan stared silently. "I never knew that." "Of course you didn't. She made me promise not to tell anyone." She said, Margaret smiled as though hearing Maya's voice again. Kindness isn't kindness anymore if you perform it for applause. Ethan closed his eyes. That sounded exactly like Maya. Exactly. Margaret reached beneath the counter and pulled out an old photograph taped beside the cash register. It showed dozens of college students crowded together during a charity breakfast fundraiser. Ethan immediately recognized himself. Then he found Maya. She stood in the back row, laughing with flour on her cheek. Margaret pointed at the picture. See that little boy? Ethan looked closer. Near the front stood a child no older than 7. Maya was kneeling beside him, tying his shoelace. Who was he? A foster child. His school couldn't afford breakfast that winter. Maya organized the fundraiser. Ethan frowned. I thought the college organized it. Margaret smiled gently. The college took credit. Maya did the work. He left the diner, carrying far more than memories. As he drove back toward the city, he realized something unsettling. During the years they had dated, Maya had never talked about the good things she did. Not once. She volunteered without posting photographs. She donated time instead of announcing generosity. She quietly solved problems nobody else noticed. How had he forgotten all of that? Or perhaps, had he simply stopped looking? That evening, Maya arrived at work to find a small cardboard box sitting neatly beside her cleaning supplies. She looked around. There was no note. Inside the box were brand new microfiber cloths, comfortable protective gloves, and a pair of professional knee pads. Nothing expensive, just practical. The kinds of things someone doing her job would genuinely appreciate. She immediately knew who had left them. When Ethan appeared a few minutes later, she held up the gloves. You shouldn't have. He smiled awkwardly. I noticed yours had holes. She looked down at her old gloves. The fingertips were indeed worn thin. I was going to replace them next payday. I know. You noticed? I notice more now. She studied him quietly. I appreciate the thought, but I can't accept gifts. They're not gifts. What are they? He answered honestly. Equipment. You work in my building. You should have what you need. She looked at him for a long moment, then slowly nodded. All right. But only because every cleaner deserves proper equipment. Not because I know you. That's fair. He smiled. I'll make sure everyone gets the same. She laughed softly. Now that sounds like the Ethan I remember. Over the following weeks, small changes began appearing throughout the building. Better cleaning supplies, new carts with wheels that didn't squeak, comfortable breakroom chairs, fresh lockers, an upgraded microwave that actually worked. The cleaning staff assumed management had increased the facility's budget. No one knew Ethan had personally approved every request. When the facility's supervisor thanked him during a meeting, Ethan simply replied, "They've been asking for these things for years. Why didn't we listen?" No one had an answer. One evening, while replacing supplies in the storage room, Maya overheard 2 younger cleaners talking. I can't believe they finally fixed everything. I heard the CEO approved it himself. Really? Yeah. They say he walked through every storage room last week. He even asked what kind of gloves we preferred. The young man laughed. What billionaire asks cleaners about gloves? Maya smiled quietly to herself. One who was finally paying attention. Later that night, Ethan found Maya standing by the large windows overlooking the city. She wasn't cleaning. She was simply watching the rain. I used to think rain made cities look lonely, he said as he joined her. And now? I think it makes them honest. She smiled. I used to say that. You did. I finally understand it. For several moments, neither spoke. Then Maya quietly asked, Why are you doing all this? What do you mean? The new equipment. The break room. The supplies. He looked out across Seattle. When I was younger, I believed leadership meant making big decisions. She waited. I've realized. Sometimes leadership is noticing the little things everyone else walks past. She nodded thoughtfully. My grandmother used to say, the way people treat those who can't repay them tells you who they really are. He smiled. She had a quote for everything. She lived long enough to collect them. The silence between them felt different now. Not uncomfortable, gentler, as though 2 strangers were slowly becoming familiar again. Then Ethan asked the question that had been quietly growing inside him. Maya, can I ask you something? She turned toward him. You can ask. I don't know if I'll answer. He accepted that. When we broke up. Why didn't you fight for us? Her smile disappeared. She looked back toward the rain. A full minute passed. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. I did. He frowned. I don't understand. You think fighting always looks like shouting. She shook her head slowly. Sometimes. Fighting means letting go of someone you love because you believe staying will hurt them more. His heart pounded. What do you mean? She closed her eyes. There are things you still don't know, Ethan. Things I never told you. Why? Because some truths don't just change relationships. They change families. Before he could ask another question, her phone rang. She looked at the screen and smiled instantly. Noah, she answered. Hi, sweetheart. Her expression softened as she listened. I'm finishing now. I'll be home before breakfast. A pause. No, don't wait up. Another pause. I love you too. She ended the call and slipped the phone back into her pocket. I'm sorry. I have to finish my floor. She walked away before Ethan could respond. He watched her disappear down the hallway, her footsteps echoing softly across the polished floor. There are things you still don't know. The words repeated in his mind. He had spent 12 years believing the past was finished. Now he realized something else. The story hadn't ended. He had simply stopped reading before the final chapters were written. And somewhere inside those missing pages lay the truth that could either set them both free or break what remained of his heart forever. Before we continue this incredible journey, take a moment to think about this. Have you ever discovered that someone you misjudged was actually one of the kindest people you'd ever meet? Or have you ever been misunderstood because people believed rumors instead of taking the time to know the real you? Share your thoughts in the comments. I read them all, and your story could encourage someone else who's carrying the weight of being misunderstood. If this story has touched your heart so far, please like this video, subscribe to Love Stories by Mr. Johnson, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss another emotional story filled with love, second chances, and life-changing lessons. Now, the biggest secret of all is about to come to light. What truth did Maya hide for 12 long years, and why did she believe revealing it would tear Ethan's family apart? Let's find out in Chapter 6. An apology is a strange thing. Some people use it to end a conversation. Others use it to escape consequences. But the rarest apologies are the ones that expect nothing in return. They simply acknowledge the pain they caused. Whether forgiveness comes or not, 3 nights passed before Ethan saw Maya again. Not because she hadn't been working, because he deliberately stayed away. For the first time in years, he realized something important. Just because he wanted answers didn't mean she owed them to him. He had spent 12 years believing she was the one who walked away. Now he understood that perhaps he had been asking the wrong question. Instead of asking, why did she leave? Maybe he should have been asking, what made her believe leaving was her only choice? The difference mattered. Thursday evening found Maya restocking supplies in the janitorial closet when she heard gentle footsteps behind her. She turned. Ethan stood there holding 2 cups of tea instead of coffee. You remembered. He smiled. You only drink coffee when you're exhausted. You always preferred chamomile. She accepted the cup. Thank you. He nodded toward the hallway. Walk with me? For a moment, she hesitated. Then, she quietly agreed. They walked through the nearly empty executive floor without speaking. Outside, rain tapped softly against the enormous windows. Seattle seemed wrapped in silver. You know, Maya said quietly, this floor always feels different after midnight. How? During the day. People rush. They're always looking ahead. At night. The building breathes. Ethan smiled. You still notice things everyone else misses. She looked at him. No. I just slow down long enough to see them. He wondered how many beautiful things he had missed simply because he had always been in a hurry. They stopped near the large window overlooking Elliott Bay. Ferries drifted across the dark water, their lights reflected like scattered stars. Ethan took a slow breath. I owe you something. She looked at him quietly. What? The truth. She didn't interrupt. When I first saw you again, I kept thinking about everything I believed 12 years ago. He looked down at the tea in his hands. I wanted to convince myself my family had been right. Because if they weren't, then I became the man who abandoned someone who loved me. He laughed softly. A strange part of me wanted to be right, even if it meant believing the worst about you. Maya remained silent, not because she was angry, because she recognized how difficult honesty could be, especially when it exposed our own failures. Ethan finally looked at her. I was wrong. The words were simple. No dramatic speech, no elaborate explanation, just truth. I don't know every detail yet. I still don't understand everything that happened. But I know this. I stopped trusting the person who had given me every reason to trust her. His voice grew quieter. I let other people's fears become louder than your character. Maya lowered her eyes. He continued. I've replayed those years over and over. I kept looking for one moment. One conversation. One request. That proved everyone was right. I couldn't find one. His throat tightened. Because it never happened. The silence that followed felt sacred. Some truths deserved room to settle. Finally, Maya spoke. Thank you. He blinked. That's all? She smiled gently. Do you know why your apology matters? He shook his head. Because you didn't apologize for hurting my feelings. You apologized for misunderstanding my character. She looked out across the city. Those are different things. He nodded slowly. I suppose they are. When someone misunderstands your feelings, too, time can heal that. But when someone misunderstands who you are, it changes how they treat you. She turned back toward him. And that leaves much deeper scars. Ethan swallowed hard. I'm sorry for those scars. She believed he meant it. That much was obvious. But sincerity wasn't the same as healing. I forgive you. He looked up, hopefully. For apologizing? His expression changed slightly. But forgiveness. Oh, she searched for the right words. Isn't something I can decide in one conversation. I understand. I spent years learning how to live without you. I can't suddenly pretend those years didn't happen. You shouldn't. I don't want to erase them. I just... He paused. I wish I could carry some of their weight. She smiled sadly. You already are. Meanwhile, across town, Noah sat at the kitchen table finishing a school assignment. The topic read, Who is someone you admire, and why? He stared thoughtfully at the blank page. His grandmother was gone. His teacher had already been the subject of another assignment. He picked up his pencil. At the top of the page he wrote, My mom. Then he began. My mom works when everyone else is sleeping. She says honest work is something to be proud of. Sometimes she looks tired, but she still smiles when I tell her about school. She says being kind is free so everyone can afford it. I want to be like her because she helps people even when nobody is watching. He stopped writing, then quietly added one final sentence. She thinks I don't notice how hard she works. But I do. The next afternoon, Mrs. Harrison called Maya. I hope I'm not interrupting. Not at all. I wanted to tell you something before parent-teacher night. Is everything okay? Oh, everything's wonderful. She laughed. Noah wrote an essay yesterday. He asked if I'd read it to the class. Maya smiled. He loves writing. He does. There was a brief pause. I thought you should know. Half the parents in the room were wiping away tears. Maya felt her own eyes begin to sting. What did he write about? You. Silence. Mrs. Harrison continued softly. Children usually admire athletes, actors, scientists. Noah wrote about dignity. He said, My mom taught me that no honest job is embarrassing. Maya covered her mouth. She couldn't speak. After they ended the call, she sat quietly on the sofa, not crying, just feeling. Sometimes parents worried so much about what they couldn't give, that they forgot everything they already had. That evening, Ethan noticed Maya sitting alone in the employee break room. She was reading something. Her eyes glistened. He approached carefully. Everything all right? She smiled through moist eyes. My son's school assignment. She hesitated, then handed it to him. Ethan read every word slowly. By the final sentence, he found himself staring silently at the page. He loves you very much. She nodded. He's the reason I kept going. Ethan folded the paper carefully before handing it back. I think, he said quietly, he'll grow into a remarkable man. I hope so. He already is. She smiled. Neither noticed the clock, or the rain, or the passing hours. For the first time since finding each other again, they weren't talking about the past. They were talking about the person the past had helped shape. And somehow, that felt like the beginning of something neither of them had expected. Not another romance. Not yet. Something quieter. The slow rebuilding of trust. One honest conversation at a time. Some truths don't arrive with raised voices. They arrive quietly. Folded inside an old envelope. Hidden in the corner of a drawer. Waiting patiently for someone to become brave enough to open them. For 12 years Maya had carried one such truth. Not because she enjoyed keeping secrets, but because revealing it would have changed lives she wasn't sure she had the right to change. The following Tuesday, Maya finished her shift earlier than usual. Instead of heading straight for the bus stop, She walked 3 blocks to a small brick church tucked between a florist and a family-owned pharmacy. She wasn't a member. She had never been. But every Tuesday morning, just after sunrise, the church opened its fellowship hall for anyone who wanted a quiet place to sit before the city fully awakened. Some people came to pray. Others came simply because silence felt easier there. Maya usually sat near the last window, wrapped her hands around a cup of tea, and spent 20 minutes doing nothing at all. It was the only part of her week that belonged entirely to her. As she settled into her usual chair, she heard a familiar voice. "Mind if I join you?" She looked up. Mrs. Eleanor Henderson, the director of the community center. "I was hoping I'd find you." Maya smiled. "You always seem to." Eleanor lowered herself carefully into the chair opposite. "I've been looking over next month's volunteer schedule." "Oh? I've also been looking over something else." She slid a manila folder across the table. Maya frowned. "What's this?" "Open it." Inside was a printed application. At the top, in bold letters, were the words, "Community Outreach Coordinator." Maya looked up in confusion. "I think you've given me the wrong paperwork." "No. I've given it to exactly the right person." Maya shook her head. "I clean the building." "You do much more than that." Eleanor leaned forward. "Do you know how many people have told me you stayed late to help them when you didn't have to? Do you know how many children ask whether Miss Maya is coming because they feel safe when you're there? I'm not offering this because I feel sorry for you. I'm offering it because you've already been doing half the job." Maya looked back at the application. "I haven't managed a program before." "No, but you've managed people. You've encouraged them. You've solved problems. You've built trust. Those skills matter more." For a long moment, Maya said nothing. Finally, she whispered, "What if I fail?" Eleanor smiled. "You know what I've learned after 40 years? The people most afraid of failing are usually the ones who prepare the hardest." Across town, Ethan sat in his father's old study. It was the only room in the Walker estate his mother had never redecorated after Richard's death. The shelves still held leather-bound books. The desk remained exactly where it had always stood, facing the garden. His father used to joke that he liked looking at growing things whenever business became complicated. Nature reminds you that not everything important happens quickly. Ethan smiled at the memory. Then he began opening drawers, not because he expected to find anything, because something inside him refused to let go. His father had kept everything. Letters, receipts, Christmas cards, old notebooks. It took nearly an hour before Ethan discovered a weathered accordion folder labeled simply, "Personal." Inside were dozens of handwritten notes. Most were ordinary. Reminders, charity donations, thank you letters. Then one envelope caught his attention. Across the front, written in his father's unmistakable handwriting, were 4 words. For Maya Brooks. Ethan's pulse quickened. The envelope had never been sealed. Inside was a folded letter. He recognized his father's handwriting immediately. "Maya, you reminded me today that dignity cannot be purchased. Thank you for refusing my help without refusing my kindness. I respect your decision. Please know that if your mother's treatment becomes more expensive than expected, my offer remains open. This isn't charity. It's one parent helping another." Ethan doesn't know about this conversation, and I won't tell him unless you ask me to. I hope one day you'll allow me to help without feeling you've lost your independence. You have my admiration, Richard Walker. Ethan read the letter again, then a third time. His hands trembled. His father had known. Not about some imaginary scheme, about Maya's struggle to pay for her mother's medical treatment, and he had respected her enough to keep her confidence. A memory surfaced with startling clarity. Years ago, Maya had suddenly started working even more shifts. He had asked why. She'd smiled and said, "Mom's been having a few health appointments." He hadn't asked anything else. He should have. His thoughts were interrupted by footsteps in the hallway. Claire appeared in the doorway. "I thought I'd find you here." He held up the letter. "Did you know?" She stepped closer and read the first few lines. Her eyes filled immediately. "So, Dad really did help. He offered." Maya refused. Claire looked at her brother. "I remember seeing her leave his study one afternoon. I asked Dad what they talked about." "What did he say?" He smiled and said, "Some conversations belong to the people who had them." Silence settled over the room. Finally, Claire whispered, "Dad trusted her." Ethan nodded slowly. "He trusted her more than I did." That evening, Ethan waited until Maya finished cleaning the executive conference room. "I found something today." She looked up from the polished table. "What?" He held out the folded letter. The moment she recognized the handwriting, her expression changed. "You found that?" It was in my father's desk. She accepted it carefully, almost reverently. I thought he'd destroyed it. He never sent it? She smiled faintly. He gave it to me. I couldn't bring myself to throw it away. So, I gave it back to him. You gave it back? I told him. If I kept it, I'd be tempted to accept the money someday. And I wanted to know I could stand on my own. Ethan struggled to speak. My father offered to pay for your mother's treatment. She nodded. He also offered to help me finish nursing school. You never told me. I couldn't. Why? Because he made me promise. He said, if Ethan ever finds out, he'll think he's responsible. He'll stop being my son and start trying to solve everything himself. He wanted you to build your own life. And I agreed. Ethan looked down. So while everyone else thought you were trying to get our family's money, you were refusing it. A sad smile crossed her face. Life can be ironic. He felt something inside him crack, not loudly, quietly, like ice beginning to melt. Maya. His voice was barely above a whisper. I don't know how to carry this. She understood what he meant. The guilt, the regret, the knowledge that the truth had been there all along. She answered gently. You don't carry it by punishing yourself. You carry it by becoming someone who doesn't repeat the mistake. He looked at her. That's what your father would have wanted too. He smiled sadly. That sounds like him. He was a good man. He was. She folded the letter carefully. I miss him. So do I. For a while, they simply stood there. Two people connected by the memory of a man who had quietly believed in both of them. As Maya prepared to leave, Ethan spoke again. I've been thinking about something. She waited. You once told me. That love wasn't measured by how loudly someone defended you. It was measured by whether they made you feel safe. I remember. I didn't make you feel safe. No, you didn't. The honesty stung, but it also healed, because for the first time, neither of them softened the truth to protect the other. I can't change that. Ethan said, no, you can't. But you can decide what kind of man you become from this moment forward. He nodded slowly. I'd like that chance. She looked at him for a long moment, then smiled, not with romance, but with quiet respect. I believe you. Those 3 words meant more to Ethan than any business award, magazine cover, or financial milestone he had ever received. Not because they erased the past, because after everything that had happened, she still believed he was capable of becoming better. As Maya stepped into the elevator, Ethan remained in the hallway, watching the doors close. For the first time in 12 years, the weight on his shoulders hadn't disappeared. But it had changed. It was no longer the weight of unanswered questions. It was the responsibility that comes after the truth is finally known. And he understood something his father had tried to teach him years ago. Character isn't revealed when life is easy. It's revealed by what you do after discovering you've been wrong. Healing rarely announces itself. There isn't a morning when you wake up and discover that all the hurt has disappeared. More often, healing looks like answering a phone call you would have ignored a month earlier. Accepting a cup of tea without wondering what someone wants in return. Laughing before you remember you were supposed to be guarding your heart. It happens so quietly that by the time you notice it, you've already begun. 2 weeks passed. For the first time since Maya and Ethan had found each other again, neither of them tried to force difficult conversations. There were no late-night interrogations about the past. No desperate attempts to rewrite history. Instead, they learned something they should have learned years ago. Sometimes, people reconnect by simply showing up. Again, and again, and again. On a rainy Wednesday afternoon, Maya received an unexpected phone call. Hello? Hi, Maya. It was Eleanor Henderson, the outreach coordinator position. So Maya immediately interrupted. I'm sorry. I haven't finished the application. You don't have to apologize. I was actually calling to tell you the board loved your interview. My interview? You've been interviewing for years. Maya frowned. I don't understand. The way you speak to parents. The way you solve disagreements. The way children run toward you instead of away from you. The way volunteers trust you. Eleanor laughed softly. We've been watching. Maya sat down slowly. So, are you saying? I'm saying we'd like to offer you the position. Silence. Complete silence. Maya? I'm here. I don't know what to say. Try yes. Tears filled Maya's eyes. Yes. She laughed through them. Yes. When the call ended, She remained sitting at the small kitchen table. The offer letter lay in front of her. Community outreach coordinator, regular daytime hours, health insurance, paid holidays. A salary that meant she could finally stop working overnight. She looked around the apartment. Nothing had changed. The peeling wallpaper was still there. The old refrigerator still hummed loudly. The kitchen chairs still wobbled slightly. Yet somehow, everything felt different. Noah walked in carrying his school bag. "Mom?" She looked up. "What happened?" He immediately noticed her tears. "Are you okay?" She smiled. "I think we're going to have dinner together every evening." He frowned. "What?" She handed him the letter. He read it slowly, then looked back at her. "Does this mean you won't have to work all night anymore?" She nodded. "No more leaving while you're asleep." His eyes widened. "No more missing Saturday mornings. No more." He dropped his backpack onto the floor and hugged her so tightly she almost lost her balance. "I knew somebody would notice how amazing you are." She laughed through tears. "So did I." "No." He pulled back. "I always knew." That evening, Maya reported for what would soon be one of her final weeks at Walker Technologies. She hadn't told anyone yet. Not even Ethan. She wanted everything to be official first. As she wheeled her cart toward the executive floor, Mr. Alvarez greeted her with his usual smile. "Evening, Maya." "Evening? You look happy." "Do I?" "You've smiled before saying hello." She laughed. "I guess I have." "Good. The world needs more of that." Meanwhile, Ethan stood in the lobby waiting for an elevator. Not because he needed to. Because he had started leaving his office whenever Maya's shift began. Not to follow her. Simply to say hello. It had become one of the quiet routines they shared. He saw her before she noticed him. There was something lighter about her. Her shoulders seemed less burdened. Her smile arrived more easily. He couldn't explain it. He only knew it made him happy. "Good evening." She looked up. "Hi. You look—" "Ah!" He searched for the right word. "Different," she laughed. "I'll take that as a compliment." "It is." She held up an envelope. "I got some news today." "Oh?" "I accepted a new job." His smile widened immediately. "That's wonderful." "It really is." "What kind of job?" "Community outreach coordinator." He looked genuinely delighted. "Maya. That's incredible. I've never seen someone more qualified." She laughed. "I've never done it before." "You've been doing it your entire life." She looked at him thoughtfully. "You really believe that?" "I do." Not because he was trying to encourage her. Because he had finally learned to see her clearly. A few nights later, Ethan received an invitation from Claire. Family dinner. His first instinct was to decline. Then he noticed a handwritten note at the bottom. "Please come. We need to talk." When Ethan arrived, the atmosphere felt unusually quiet. His mother greeted him warmly. Claire hugged him. Daniel nodded politely from across the dining room. Dinner passed with ordinary conversation, weather, business, travel, until Claire finally placed her fork down. "I saw Maya last week." Silence. His mother stiffened. "Oh? She's doing well." "Good." Claire looked around the table. "She's leaving the cleaning job." Daniel glanced up. "What for?" "A management position at the community center." Their mother offered a polite smile. "That's nice." Claire took a slow breath. "I also read Dad's letter." The room became still. Daniel frowned. "What letter?" Claire looked directly at their mother. "The one Dad wrote to Maya." His mother's face lost color. "Ethan showed me." Daniel looked confused. "What are you talking about?" Ethan reached into his jacket pocket and placed a copy of the letter on the table. Daniel read it silently. Halfway through, his expression changed. He looked at his mother. "You knew about this?" She didn't answer. "You knew Dad had offered to help her mother?" Still nothing. Daniel looked back at the letter. "And she refused." His mother quietly folded her napkin. "I was trying to protect my family." Claire's voice remained calm. "No, Mom. You were trying to protect the version of the family you believed existed." A painful silence settled over the room. Finally, Daniel spoke. "I owe Maya an apology." His words surprised everyone, including himself. "I was wrong." He looked at Ethan. "I repeated things I'd heard. I never actually saw her do anything dishonest." Ethan nodded slowly. "Neither did I." For several moments, no one spoke. Then their mother whispered, "I truly believed I was protecting you." Ethan looked at her with compassion rather than anger. "I know. I believe that." She looked relieved. Then he continued, But believing something, but doesn't make it true. Tears filled her eyes. I know that now. Later that night, Ethan drove home through quiet streets. For the first time, he wasn't angry with his family. People could love deeply and still make devastating mistakes. His mother had acted from fear. Daniel had followed assumptions. He had chosen silence. Everyone had contributed to the tragedy in different ways. No single villain, just flawed people. That understanding didn't erase the pain, but it made forgiveness feel possible. As he pulled into his driveway, his phone buzzed. A message from Maya. Thank you for believing I could do more than survive. Today reminded me that sometimes people see our future before we do. Ethan smiled, then typed his reply. You already built that future. The rest of us are only beginning to notice. He looked at the message for a long moment before pressing send. Some conversations didn't need grand declarations. Sometimes, respect was the strongest expression of love. And perhaps, that was exactly where they needed to begin. Some people believe trust returns with one heartfelt apology. It doesn't. Trust returns in quieter ways. By answering the phone when you said you would. By remembering someone's favorite tea. By showing up without expecting praise. By becoming predictable in all the right ways. Love, Maya had learned, wasn't built by grand moments. It was built by small promises kept over and over again. The following Saturday morning, Maya stood outside the Community Hope Center carrying a cardboard box filled with family photographs, notebooks, and the small potted plant that had sat on her kitchen windowsill for years. Her first official day as community outreach coordinator had arrived. The building looked different in daylight. For years she had cleaned its hallways after everyone had gone home. Now children were running through the entrance carrying art supplies. Volunteers were arranging tables for a literacy program, and parents chatted over coffee while toddlers chased one another across the reception area. It was noisy, messy, alive, exactly the kind of place Maya loved. Eleanor greeted her with a warm embrace. Ready? Maya looked around the bustling room. I'm terrified. Eleanor laughed. Good. The best leaders usually are. Because they care about getting it right. She handed Maya a small key. Office number 3. Maya stared at it for a moment. She had spent years unlocking buildings to clean them. Now she was unlocking one that belonged to her work. The difference wasn't the key. It was what it represented. Her office was modest. A wooden desk, 2 visitor chairs, a bookshelf, a window overlooking the playground. Nothing luxurious, everything meaningful. She placed Noah's framed spelling test on the corner of her desk. Beside it, she set the faded photograph of her late mother. Finally, she placed the small blue elephant Noah had insisted she keep. For luck, he had said. She smiled. Maybe luck wasn't what it represented. Maybe it represented home. At Walker Technologies, Ethan found himself walking past the executive floor more often than necessary. The cleaning cart wasn't outside his office anymore. The hallway felt strangely different. Cleaner, perhaps. Yet somehow emptier. Mr. Alvarez noticed immediately. You miss talking to her. Ethan smiled sheepishly. Is it obvious? The older man chuckled. You've looked down this hallway 6 times. I counted. Ethan laughed. I've become predictable. No. Mr. Alvarez shook his head. You've become human. Later that afternoon, Lauren entered Ethan's office, carrying several reports. She placed them neatly on his desk before studying him for a moment. You've smiled more this month than you did all last year. Have the first? You even asked the intern how her exams were going. I did. You remembered her father's surgery. Ethan leaned back in his chair. I've been thinking. Dangerous habit. He laughed. I used to believe leadership meant always having answers. And now? I think leadership begins with paying attention. Lauren nodded approvingly. People notice. He frowned. What do you mean? The maintenance team. The reception staff. The cleaners. They've been talking. About what? About how the CEO suddenly knows everyone's names. He looked out the window. It took me far too long. Lauren smiled gently. Maybe. But you're here now. A week later, the Community Hope Center hosted its annual Family Literacy Day. The building overflowed with children carrying books, volunteers reading stories aloud, and parents helping with craft tables. Maya barely stopped moving. She organized activities, solved scheduling problems, found a missing backpack, comforted a little girl who became frightened during a fire drill. No one asked her to do these things. She simply noticed what needed doing. Eleanor watched quietly from across the room. Another board member joined her. That's the woman you hired? Eleanor smiled proudly. No, that's the woman we finally gave a title to. Around midday, A volunteer hurried toward Maya. "Someone's asking for you." She looked up. Standing near the entrance was Ethan, not wearing an expensive suit, just jeans, trainers, and a navy sweater. He held 2 large cardboard boxes. "I hope I'm not interrupting." She looked genuinely surprised. "What are you doing here?" "I called Eleanor." "You did?" He nodded. "I asked whether you needed volunteers." Maya looked towards Eleanor. The older woman waved cheerfully. "I accepted." Maya laughed. "You volunteered?" "I filled out the paperwork." "You had paperwork?" "There were 3 pages." It was exhausting. She laughed harder than she had in weeks. "Come on. I'll show you where we're setting up." Within minutes, Ethan found himself assembling children's bookshelves alongside university students and retired teachers. He wasn't particularly good at it. One shelf leaned noticeably to one side. A little boy walked over. "I think it's crooked." Ethan stepped back. "So do I." The boy grinned. "My grandpa says if you're not embarrassed by your first try, you probably didn't challenge yourself enough." Ethan laughed. "Your grandpa sounds wise. He watches a lot of documentaries." Together, they fixed the shelf. Across the room, Maya watched the interaction. Not because Ethan was trying to impress anyone. He clearly wasn't. He simply listened to the child, as though his opinion mattered. Years ago, she had fallen in love with Ethan because he treated people kindly. Then life had buried that version of him beneath pressure, expectations, and fear. Now, she was beginning to see that young man again. Only this version carried more humility. Later that afternoon, Noah arrived after finishing football practice with a neighbor. The moment he entered the center, he spotted Ethan arranging books. He hesitated, then walked over. "Hi." Ethan smiled warmly. "Hey, Noah. My mum said you work where she used to clean." "I do. You don't wear a suit today." "I was told I'd scare the children." Noah laughed. "I think the books would be more scared." Ethan pretended to look offended. "I thought this sweater looked respectable." "It does. But it also has paint on it." Ethan looked down. A streak of blue paint ran across one sleeve. "I guess that's proof I'm volunteering." Noah grinned. "I like it." The conversation felt wonderfully ordinary. No awkwardness. No forced bonding. Just 2 people learning who the other was. During the afternoon reading session, a shy little girl refused to join the group. She stood alone near the doorway clutching a worn paperback book. Maya noticed immediately. Before she could move, Ethan quietly walked over and knelt to the child's eye level. "I like your book." The little girl looked down. "It's old. My favorite books usually are." She glanced up. "Really? They've been loved the longest." The child thought about that for a moment, then slowly followed him toward the reading circle. Maya smiled quietly. That wasn't something a billionaire CEO needed to do. It was simply something a kind man chose to do. As the event came to an end, volunteers began folding tables and stacking chairs. Noah helped gather crayons into plastic containers. When everything was finally packed away, he wandered over to Ethan. "Can I ask you something?" "Always. Mom says people should never stop learning." "I think she's right." "So, what have you learned lately?" The question caught Ethan off guard. He looked across the room at Maya, who was laughing with Eleanor while carrying a box of donated books. Then he looked back at Noah. "I learned." "What? That listening is harder than talking." Noah nodded thoughtfully. "What else?" "I learned that saying I'm sorry means very little if you don't change afterwards." The boy considered that answer. "I think Mom would agree." "I hope so." Noah smiled. "I think she's starting to." Those 6 words stayed with Ethan long after the event ended. As the sun dipped lower over Seattle, volunteers slowly headed home. Maya locked the center doors and stepped outside. Ethan was waiting beside the walkway. "I wanted to thank you." She looked surprised. "For what?" "For letting me be here." She smiled. "You didn't need my permission." "Maybe not. But it mattered to me." They began walking toward the car park together. For several moments neither spoke. Then Maya stopped. "You know, too, I've been thinking." He waited. "We've spent weeks talking about everything that went wrong." "We have. I don't want our future, if there is one, to be built entirely around old mistakes." He looked at her quietly. "What do you want it built on?" She smiled softly. "New memories. Not replacements, not corrections. Simply, new memories." He nodded. "I'd like that." "So would I." They stood together beneath the evening sky, neither rushing to fill the silence. Across the playground, Noah chased a football with 2 new friends, his laughter floating through the warm summer air. Maya watched him for a long moment. Then she looked back at Ethan. For the first time in 12 years, she wasn't comparing him to the man she had lost. She was seeing the man standing in front of her. And perhaps that was the greatest lesson memory could ever teach. Healing doesn't happen when we perfectly recreate the past. It begins when we stop asking people to become who they were and give them the chance to become who they are willing to be. Not every love story ends with fireworks. Not every second chance begins with a kiss. Sometimes, the greatest expression of love is becoming a place where another person no longer feels the need to defend themselves. Home isn't always a house. Sometimes, home is the first person who truly sees you. Autumn arrived quietly in Seattle. The maple trees lining the neighborhood streets turned shades of amber and crimson. The morning air carried a crispness that reminded people winter was never far away. For Maya, life had settled into a rhythm she once believed impossible. She woke before Noah, made breakfast, walked him to school, spent her days at the Community Hope Center, returned home in time to help with homework, shared dinner every evening. Simple things. Things most families took for granted. To her, they felt extraordinary. One Tuesday morning, she stood on the apartment balcony holding a warm mug of tea while watching Noah race his bicycle down the sidewalk. "Careful," she called. "I am." "You said that yesterday." "And I didn't fall." She laughed. "You've got me there." There had been a time when she believed happiness would arrive through some dramatic change. Instead, it had arrived disguised as ordinary mornings. At Walker Technologies, Ethan's office looked different too. Not because of new furniture, because he had removed most of it. The oversized conference table was gone. In its place stood a round table with 4 chairs. The heavy curtains had been replaced with lighter ones that allowed more sunlight inside. Lauren noticed immediately. "You redecorated." I simplified. "Why?" He looked around the room. "I realized I'd built an office that impressed people. I'd rather build one where people feel comfortable telling me the truth." She smiled. "I think your father would approve." "I hope so." Over the past 2 months, Walker Technologies had changed in small but noticeable ways. Every new employee, from interns to executives, now attended the same orientation. The first presentation wasn't about profits. It wasn't about company values printed on glossy brochures. It was about respect. Ethan personally spoke at every session. One afternoon, he stood before a room of 30 new employees. Behind him, a single sentence appeared on the screen. "Every person deserves dignity." He looked around the room before speaking. "When I was younger, I believed leadership meant being the smartest person in the room. I was wrong." The employees listened quietly. The best leaders aren't remembered because they had all the answers. They're remembered because people felt safe telling them the truth. He paused. "I learned that lesson far later than I should have." No one knew he wasn't speaking about business. He was speaking about Maya. Later that week, Maya received an invitation from Noah's school, Family Career Day. Parents were invited to speak about their jobs. She almost declined. "What would I even say?" She asked Eleanor. "You'd tell the truth." "I'm not a doctor. I'm not an engineer. I'm not famous." Eleanor smiled. "You help families find food. You organize after-school programs. You connect lonely seniors with volunteers. You help struggling parents find childcare. You remind children they matter. If that's not worth talking about, I don't know what is." Career Day arrived on a bright Friday morning. Parents took turns speaking to the students. A firefighter, a dentist, an airline pilot. Finally, Mrs. Harrison smiled toward Maya. "And now, we'd like to welcome Noah's mum." Maya walked slowly to the front of the classroom. 30 curious faces looked back at her. She smiled nervously. "Hi, everyone. I'm Maya. I work at a community center." One little girl raised her hand immediately. "Do you get to help people every day?" Maya smiled. "I try." Another boy asked, "Do you make lots of money?" Several parents laughed softly. Maya did too. "No, I don't." The room grew quiet. "But can I tell you something?" Everyone nodded. "When I was your age, I thought successful people were the ones who earned the biggest paychecks." She paused. "Now I think success means something different." A little boy frowned. "What?" She looked around the classroom. "Success is going home knowing someone's day became a little easier because you were there." The children thought about that. Then Noah quietly raised his hand. "Mom?" "Yes? Is that why you always tell me kindness is free?" She smiled proudly. "Exactly." After school, Mrs. Harrison walked Maya to the car park. I hope you know. The children will remember that talk. You think so? I know so. They won't remember everyone's job title. They'll remember how you made them feel. That evening, Ethan received an unexpected visitor. His mother. She stood awkwardly in the reception area of Walker Technologies. I hope I'm not interrupting. You never are. He invited her upstairs. She looked around his redesigned office. It feels... She searched for the word. Warmer. I wanted it to. She nodded thoughtfully. I've been thinking. So have I. She looked down at her hands. I'd like to meet Maya. Ethan remained quiet. I don't know whether she'll want that. I know. I don't expect forgiveness. I only... Her voice trembled. I'd like the chance to apologize. Ethan studied his mother's face. For the first time in years, he saw no certainty, only humility. Perhaps that was where healing always began. The following Saturday, Maya organized the Community Hope Center's annual Autumn Harvest Fair. Families gathered in the garden. Children painted pumpkins. Local musicians played soft acoustic music beneath strings of warm lights. Volunteers served homemade soup and fresh bread. The event wasn't extravagant. It didn't need to be. People laughed. Neighbors met for the first time. Children introduced new friends to old ones. Community quietly happened. Ethan arrived carrying several boxes of donated children's books. You brought reinforcements. He smiled. I was told books are heavy. They are. So are pumpkins. I stayed away from those. She laughed. Wise decision. Together, they arranged books across long wooden tables. It felt natural now. No awkwardness. No rehearsed conversations. Simply two people working side by side. Late that afternoon, Noah wandered over carrying 2 cups of hot apple cider. One for you. He handed the first cup to his mother. And one for... He looked at Ethan. My friend. Ethan accepted it with a surprised smile. Thank you. Noah shrugged. You helped fix the bookshelves. And you came to career day. I wasn't speaking. You still came. The boy smiled. My teacher says showing up matters. Ethan looked toward Maya. She smiled knowingly. Noah had been listening all along. Not only to what adults said, to how they lived. As sunset painted the Seattle sky shades of orange and gold, families slowly began heading home. The playground emptied. The music faded. Volunteers folded tables. Maya stood quietly near the entrance, watching children wave goodbye. Ethan joined her. Tired? A little. Worth it? She looked around. Parents laughing. Children hugging donated books. Neighbors promising to meet again next weekend. She smiled. Every second. Ethan followed her gaze. I used to think changing the world required enormous ideas. And now? I think it starts with helping the person standing in front of you. She looked at him. Someone taught you that. They did. And I wasn't listening. You are now? He nodded. I am now. The evening breeze carried the scent of autumn leaves through the garden. Neither of them noticed how long they stood there. Sometimes, the most meaningful moments were the ones that asked nothing of you except your presence. And for the first time in many years, presence felt like enough. People often ask when forgiveness happens. They imagine a single conversation, one perfect apology, one emotional embrace. But forgiveness rarely arrives like lightning. It arrives like sunrise, quietly, patiently, so gradually that you don't notice the darkness has disappeared until you're already standing in the light. 3 weeks after the harvest fair, Maya found herself back at the Seattle waterfront. It had been years since she'd walked there. The ferries still crossed Elliott Bay. Street musicians still played near the piers. Couples still leaned against the railings watching the water. Some places carried memories so gently that returning didn't hurt anymore. It simply reminded you how much life had continued. She smiled to herself. Once, she had avoided this place because every corner reminded her of Ethan. Now, the memories no longer belonged to pain alone. They belonged to growth. Mom! Noah ran ahead, pointing toward the water. They're letting people feed the birds. Just don't feed your fingers. I'll try. You'd better do more than try. He laughed and disappeared toward a small group of children. Maya leaned against the wooden railing, watching the waves roll gently beneath the afternoon sun. You picked the same place. She turned. Ethan stood a few steps away, hands tucked into the pockets of his jacket. He smiled. So did you. She laughed softly. I suppose I did. Neither of them had planned it. At least, not together. Yet somehow, they had both ended up where so many of their happiest memories had begun. For several moments, they simply watched the water. Then Ethan spoke. You remember our first date? She smiled. You were 20 minutes late. I got lost. You grew up here. I know. I still got lost. You blamed construction. There actually was construction. There wasn't. He laughed. You remember everything. She looked at the water. No. I remember the things that mattered. He nodded slowly. So do I. Another comfortable silence settled between them. Finally, Ethan reached into his coat pocket. Maya looked at him curiously. What is it? Instead of a jewelry box, or a set of keys, or anything expensive. He pulled out a folded piece of paper. She frowned. A list? He smiled. My promises. She looked surprised. You made a list? I did. May I? He handed it to her. Written in neat handwriting were only a few sentences. I promise to ask, instead of assuming. I promise to listen before defending myself. I promise never to let someone else's opinion become louder than your character. I promise to earn your trust every day instead of expecting it because of yesterday. And if I ever stop doing these things, I hope you'll remind me before silence does. Maya read every word twice. When she looked back up, her eyes glistened. You didn't promise forever. He shook his head. No, I promise today. And tomorrow. I've learned forever is built one ordinary day at a time. A tear escaped before she could stop it. Not from sadness, from relief, because the man standing before her wasn't trying to recreate the 24-year-old she had once loved. He was offering to become someone even better. She folded the paper carefully and slipped it into her handbag. I'm keeping this. I hoped you would. Bye. She smiled. I have something for you too. From inside her bag, she removed another folded piece of paper. Its edges were worn from years of being opened and closed. He recognized it immediately. Noah's spelling test. The original? She nodded. I've carried it every day. She turned it over. On the back, in her own handwriting, were words Ethan had never seen. She handed it to him. He read slowly. Whenever life becomes heavy, remember that children learn hope by watching adults refuse to give up. No matter what happens, choose kindness first. It never leaves you poorer. He looked up. When did you write this? The night Noah brought it home. I needed to remind myself. He smiled gently. I think it reminded more than just you. A few yards away, Noah came running back carrying 3 paper cups of hot chocolate. I guessed. He handed one to his mother, one to Ethan, and one for me. You guessed right, Ethan said. Noah grinned proudly. I usually do. They stood together, overlooking the bay. No one spoke for a while. The silence wasn't empty. It was peaceful. Later that afternoon, as they began walking back toward the car park, Maya slowed her pace. Ethan? Yeah? I've spent a long time thinking about us. So have I. I realized something. What? I don't want to go backwards. He nodded. Neither do I. I don't want to become the people we were. We can't. We've both changed. She smiled. And that's a good thing. He looked at her carefully. So, what do we do? She reached for his hand. Not dramatically, not hesitantly, simply, naturally. We keep walking. He intertwined his fingers with hers. No promises of perfection. No declarations that everything would always be easy. Just 2 people choosing the same direction. Sometimes, that was enough. 6 months later, the Community Hope Center celebrated the opening of its new family resource wing. The expansion wasn't funded by Walker Technologies alone. It had been built through donations from local businesses, volunteers, neighborhood churches, teachers, and families who believed that helping a community was everyone's responsibility. At Maya's request, no room carried the Walker name. Instead, the entrance displayed a simple plaque. This place exists because ordinary people chose to care for one another. Ethan had smiled when he read it. It sounds like you. She had laughed. It sounds like all of us. Children raced through the building carrying books and art supplies. Parents attended financial literacy workshops. Teenagers received tutoring after school. Grandparents volunteered in the reading corner. The building hummed with life. Mrs. Eleanor Henderson stood beside Maya. You've built something beautiful. Maya shook her head. We all did. No. Eleanor smiled. You simply reminded everyone what they were capable of. Across the room, Noah, now a little taller than before, was helping a younger child find a book about planets. Saturn's still my favorite, he explained confidently. But every planet matters. Ethan watched with a smile. You know, Claire said quietly beside him. He reminds me of someone. He reminds me of his mother. Claire nodded. I was going to say the same thing. That evening, after everyone had gone home, Maya found herself standing alone beside one of the large windows overlooking the playground. Without thinking, she picked up a cloth and wiped away a few small fingerprints left by excited children. Ethan walked over. You know someone else could do that. She smiled without looking up. I know. Then why? She placed the cloth back on the windowsill. Because honest work never stopped being honest just because my job title changed. He smiled. I hoped you'd say something like that. She turned toward him. And besides... She looked through the spotless glass. Outside, Noah was laughing as he kicked a football across the empty playground. I like seeing clearly. Ethan followed her gaze. So do I. He slipped his hand into hers. Neither hurried to leave. The building was quiet now, not lonely, peaceful, just as it had been on those long nights when Maya cleaned offices while the city slept. Only this time, she wasn't looking through someone else's window. She was looking through one she had helped build. The same woman who had once been called a gold digger had never been searching for wealth. She had been searching for dignity, for truth, for a place where her son could grow without shame. And the billionaire who had once mistaken rumors for reality had discovered the most valuable lesson of his life. Success isn't measured by the size of the company you lead, or the home you own, or the number of people who admire you. It's measured by the number of lives that become lighter because you were part of them. Some memories fade, some memories ache, and some, if we have the courage to learn from them, become home. If this story touched your heart, remember this. Never let someone else's opinion become louder than your own experience of a person's character. Ask questions before making assumptions. Listen before judging. And never underestimate the dignity of honest work. Because a person's value has never been determined by the job they do, only by the kindness they choose to show while doing it. Thank you for spending this journey with us. If you enjoyed this story, please like, share it with someone who believes in second chances, and subscribe to Love Stories by Mr. Johnson for more heartfelt American love stories filled with hope, love, and life lessons. Until next time, take care of yourself, and take care of each other.